video series, and we're going to go much slower, much more detail. The book we just passed out, The Long War Against God by Henry Morris, is just an excellent book. One of the best I've ever seen, tracing the history of evolutionary thought. See, evolution didn't start with Charles Darwin. It started with Satan in the Garden of Eden. And he traces it up through all the different Eastern religions and everything else. And I want you to turn to page 60. Because last week we were talking about how evolution and racism tie together. By the way, the book is normally $13 in softback. It's enlisted in our catalog. It has hardback for like $21. I think our cost is like $10. If you're in the class and you want to get one for $10, you're welcome to do that. Well worth reading. I would say one of the top 10 books I've ever read. This would be it. It's that good. I've only read 11 books. Page 60, it covers how all the people were racist at the time when evolution became a popular theory. Last week we left off talking about how the Aborigines, were persecuted and slaughtered just because they were Aborigines. They thought they were inferior. How many have seen the movie Quigley Down Under? Where the marksman goes to Australia and they hire him to come down there and start shooting these Aborigines. People really did that. They would round them up and shoot them like cows. One of their arguments that the evolutionists had was the Aborigines are inferior because their jaws are bigger. Here's a picture of an Eskimo jaw. The side of the jaw is much thicker. And a dentist would look at this and say, wow, what did this guy eat? Well, Eskimos, like the Aborigines, are nomadic. And the Aborigines travel around. They don't have homes, and they don't want to carry a toolbox around everywhere they go. So they use their teeth constantly as a vise or as a pliers or as a scissors or whatever. That's one of their primary tools, okay? And so they're always holding things, like you want to strip the meat off the bone, you clamp the bone in your teeth and pull the meat off, or strip the bark of a tree branch for something. That's your vise, okay, your portable vise. Any bodybuilder will tell you, the more you use the muscles, the bigger the bones grow. As you pull on the muscles, well, you can see from here, the muscle pulls on the bone responds by sending a message to the brain saying, look, you better send some more material down here. We got to build this muscle, this bone stronger to withstand this pressure. Now, of course, it's a much slower process. You can build up bigger muscles quickly, but bigger bones take longer. But people really do get bigger bones as well as bigger muscles. Ask any biology teacher or go to any, Gray's Anatomy. We'll talk about that, I believe. But because the Eskimos and the Aborigines use their teeth all the time for a vise, their jaws are actually thicker and heavier duty than the average person. Some have argued that wisdom teeth, I got a letter the other day, said wisdom teeth are proof of evolution. I wrote back and I said, well, there's a couple of flaws in your thinking. First of all, wisdom teeth is losing something, not gaining something, Secondly, if man used to develop slower when God first created the world, 6,000 years ago, they might have been, didn't enter their teenage years until they're 20. And, didn't get married till they're 60. I mean, all you got to do is look at the dates in the Bible. So I think it was just a long, slow, lazy childhood, delayed maturation. Another factor to consider, there was so much to learn. Think how many plants and herbs and uses, Adam was pre-programmed with, or learned from talking to God, and then Adam had to pass this knowledge on to his kids. And they have to pass it on to their kids. I mean, in one sense, I learned so much from my dad. It was just incredible. We built houses together and worked on cars together. And even when he was, 70 years old, it was neat to talk to him because he knew so many things. It's like, wow, I didn't know that. Dad, here I am, 35 and he's 70. And it's like, wow, Dad, that's neat. I didn't know you knew that. Well, Adam lived to be 900, plus came pre-programmed. So I just suspect before the flood came, I don't have a chart up here, but before the flood came, the people were developing much slower. You were a kid for 20 or 30 years. No, not a care in the world. Enjoy life, a lot to learn, but just basically have a wonderful time enjoying God's creation. So if the people were before the flood were 8, 9, 10 feet tall, like we covered on seminar part 2 of our series, that there's certainly some indication that they might have been, at least some were that big. Their jaws are bigger. Now you have room for that extra tooth. It's not a problem. The only reason it's a problem today is because we're probably genetic dwarfs compared to what we used to be. The Chihuahuas and the pug and the little dogs that they've bred to be real tiny have all sorts of problems because the gene pool is still trying to make them grow something bigger that is not, there isn't room in their body now. Well, that's what the wisdom teeth are. They're the opposite of evolution. They're proof of a much better original creation. So the Aborigines, though, were hunted, they were killed, they were enslaved, they were treated just like animals. Some missionaries tried to work with them and did an amazing job. I mean, many Aborigines were saved, got civilized, whatever that word means, and made great Christians. There are Aborigines churches over there today in Australia. They are not an inferior species. They have a different lifestyle. You know, they prefer not having like the guys that live under the bridges, you know. Half the guys that live under bridges, that's what they want. They're homeless because they don't want to have bills to pay. They like the freedom from responsibility. And there have always been folks like that, you know. They'd rather go off in the woods hunting all their life, you know, and, you know, be the mountain man, Daniel Boone kind of guy. So I think, well, we'll get into more of that later about the Ice Age in Seminar Part 6 if we ever get that far. But look on page 61 at the top in Henry Morris's book. It was not only Darwin and Huxley, the two top evolutionists, who were racists. All of them were. This fact has been documented thoroughly in a key book by John Haller, appropriately called Outcasts from Evolution. One reviewer of this book said, "This is an extremely important book, documenting, as it does, what has long been suspected and ingrained firm and almost universal racism of North American men of science during the 19th and into the 20th century. Ad ab initio. Afro-Americans were viewed by these intellectuals as being in certain ways unredeemable, unchangeable, irrevocably inferior." This is what they said. The quote we read last week, go to the bottom of page 60, just before that. This is what Huxley said. We only read part of the quote last week. "No rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior of the white man. And if this be true, it is simply incredible that when all his disabilities are removed, and our prognathous relative has a fair field and no favor as well as no oppressor, he will be able to compete successfully with his bigger-brained and smaller-jawed rival in a contest which is to be carried on by thoughts and not bites." In other words, if it involves biting or, you know, strength-type contest, they might be better, but if it involves thinking, the white man is better. That's what he's saying right here. That was the attitude of the 1800s. Now, racism has existed all through history, of course, but evolution is the only way you can justify racism, because the Bible says very clearly we all descended from Adam, and then later all from Noah's family. How on earth can one race be superior? Scripture certainly does not teach racism. God did tell the Jews only to marry other Jews, not to marry outside, and there may be a lot of reasons for that, but I'm Norwegian, my wife is Irish. Is that an interracial marriage? You know, there's certainly no scriptural reason to not have a black and white person marry. There's no scripture against that at all.
There is only one race.
There's only one race, the human race. There's different colors, but there's only one race. I think in some segments of society it may be, you know, really, really hard on the kids, and that's unnecessary to do that, you know. So, but I wouldn't, you know, if we had a black guy working for us for a while, his wife was white, great couple, loved the Lord, moved on, teaches school now in Tennessee, you know. It's probably for a long time, maybe forever, going to be some kind of racial, you know, stigma in America, at least in some parts of the world. But, you know, I don't think it's necessarily the wisest thing to do, but there's no scripture against it whatsoever. Okay, so evolution didn't cause racism. Evolution justified racism. Okay, in 1904, the World's Fair was held in St. Louis. That'll be a good quiz question. At the St. Louis World's Fair, if you go to the St. Louis Zoo today, you can still see many of the buildings and places where after they had the World's Fair, they gave this area to the zoo and or science center, I believe, in St. Louis. The buildings are still being used. One of the displays had 2,000 what they called primitive people on display to demonstrate their lack of evolutionary progress. Indians were put on this display, pygmies from Africa. There was a whole pygmy village set up at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904.
Dead or
alive? They had them living there, you know, doing their little things, you know, making their stone tools, and people would come by and watch them. Oh, isn't that cute? You know, what a shame. He's so inferior. He's so stupid. If only he wasn't black. If only he was like us white people. You know?
Wow.
I mean, that's what was, and that's in America, in St. Louis, 1904. Anthropologists designed the entire display. Ota Benga was one of the pygmies from Africa. He was taken away from his wife and 2 children and put in a cage with chimpanzees. He lived with the chimpanzees, not all the time. He got out, from time to time. But he got converted. Somebody led him to the Lord, but he just never could get over this stigma. Oh, you're the guy that was in the cage with the monkeys. Ha, ha, ha. He ended up killing himself, committed suicide. This attitude, though, even into the 1900s, even into the last century, was because of evolutionary thinking. Theodore Roosevelt, as good a man as he was, and he was a great godly man in many ways, okay, and certainly a great patriot in many ways, he was strongly influenced by the evolution theory. He believed the Indians were an inferior species. Most people believed that back in those days. And if you look at some of the old westerns, they often called the Indians savages. And they portrayed them as, wicked, evil savages. Really, there are very few movies about the Indians that portray them as the good guys. It's almost always the bad guys. I can remember as a kid growing up, we played cowboys and Indians. And it's just, everybody did. I don't know back in your era if it was that way or not, but the movie Dances with Wolves is, one of the few movies that portrays the Indians as the good guys and the white people as the bad guys. It just is sad that what happened. We visited in Arizona and right near the Four Corners, an Indian reservation, and I have spent, I don't know, quite a bit of time, I guess, talking with Indians and discussing their religions and their beliefs and stuff like that. There still today is a stigma with some people versus the Indians. Some people still think they're inferior for some reason, genetically inferior. And what's happened because of the dumb things we did to the Indians back in the 1800s, it's about like the welfare for the black people, or for primarily the black people. It has just destroyed their work ethic in many cases. It's destroyed their character, destroyed their families, because they don't have a father in the home. And 65%, I believe now, of black births are illegitimate. 65? 73 you heard today? The welfare has destroyed the whole black culture. I remember as a kid we had friends that were black, and they were hard-working like everybody else, and took care of their family like they're supposed to, It's so sad. And that's what happened to the Indians. So many of them now. When I was down in Chinle, Arizona, and in Farmington, New Mexico, for a couple of weeks working with the Indians there, a large percentage of them are alcoholics. They get their monthly paycheck and go drink till they run out of money. The man has no purpose, in the family. So he's a drunk, and mom raises the kids. It's a matriarchal society. Welfare does that. Roosevelt said, Theodore Roosevelt said, "I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding. And when the evil nature of these people is sufficiently flagrant, this should be done." What's he saying there? You should sterilize them. And by the way, in the early 1900s, there was a lot of this going on. Many mental institutions would take people that they thought were mentally retarded, sterilize them, so they wouldn't have children. I mean, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, this happened to. Lots of people, just forced sterilization. Roosevelt went on to say, "Criminals should be sterilized and feeble-minded persons forbidden to leave offspring behind them. The emphasis should be laid on getting desirable people to breed." This is exactly what happened with Adolf Hitler's thinking.
We are desirable.
And we happen to be the desirable people, so, let's kill everybody else or prevent them from breeding. Many, many Jews, if they weren't executed, were sterilized during the concentration camp era, World War II. Let's go on here. Roosevelt said, this book from Bob Jones University says, "This statement was not made by a Nazi in the 1930s, but in 1913 by American patriot Theodore Roosevelt. Although he was a great leader in other ways, he, with most of American upper middle class in the early 1900s, thought that the many immigrants from Europe, Scotland, Ireland, and the Orient were a threat to American society." Well, how many of you have one of your ancestors as an immigrant from one of those places? Just about everybody in the room, right? Sure. But they were really concerned that they were a threat to American society. Actually, in 1871, Congress officially scrapped all treaties with the Indians and moved them off to the reservation system that is still in effect today. But even before 1871, the Indians, of course, were being mistreated. I don't know when Geronimo was finally captured. Does anybody know he's held down here at Fort Pickens? That was his prison for a while. 1890, would that have been? Or I could look it up, Geronimo. But the Indian Wars really are just really a little over 100 years ago. There were still serious problems, you know, on the frontier. 1871, the Congress scrapped all treaties. Now before that, back in 1820, 30, 40 era, somewhere in there, I don't remember, the Trail of Tears incident took place. The Cherokee Indians, which lived mostly around North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. You know the cave we went in, Eric, right on the Alabama-Georgia border? You drive by it all the time on the way to Chattanooga. Cave, Sequoia Cave. Sequoia Cave was the headquarters, or was one of the places where the Cherokee Indians met. One of their great chiefs was Chief Ross. He taught all of his people how to read. They made up a Cherokee alphabet with, I think, like 80 characters, and because each had 80 different sounds in the Cherokee language or something like that. He taught them all how to read in just a matter of a few months. Here they were, people with an unwritten language, just a spoken language. He gave them an alphabet, gave them a written language, and taught them to read. They were fitting in just fine with the white society around them. You know, you might have an Indian neighbor next door, and nobody thought anything about it. But Sam Houston was married to a Cherokee Indian. I believe I have the facts straight. It's been a while since I read this, but Congress voted to move the Cherokees out to Oklahoma to make room for the white man. One famous town was called Ross's Landing, I believe the name of it was. All the Cherokees were moved out. On the forced march, it was interesting, they scheduled it so that the property would be taken over about 2 weeks before harvest time. So the Indians did all the work, planted the crops, you know, plowed the land, raised the crops, got them just ready to harvest, and they're forcefully moved out. I mean, soldiers came in with guns, loaded them on wagons, and moved them to Oklahoma. It's called the Trail of Tears. Went right through Cherokee Pass, Arkansas. You know, we stop there at the gas station at Cherokee Pass all the time. Right through Imboden, Arkansas. The Trail of Tears went. 1/3 of them died along the way. Sam Houston was just enraged with what Congress was doing. They renamed the city that was Ross's Landing, I think was the name of the city originally. Again, you can go back and look up and do research on this. But so people would forget about what happened to the Cherokees. They renamed the city Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's where you went to school. It's quite a history there. You won't understand what happened to the Indians, though, until you understand how evolution ties in. Now, the Trail of Tears happened before Charles Darwin wrote his book. And I had an atheist write me a letter saying, "You're so stupid. Don't you know the Trail of Tears happened before Darwin's book was even written?" Well, he's the one that's stupid if he thinks Darwin started evolution. It started way before that. Okay, Darwin stole most of his ideas from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin. No, I understand the Trail of Tears happened before Darwin's book came out, but still, what happened to the Indians was a result of the racism, which it can only be justified by a theory like evolution. The Bible is very clear in Malachi chapter 2, "Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother?" I worked for 17 years driving a bus every Sunday and often Wednesday in an all-black neighborhood for church, bringing kids to church. When we were going to the campus church over here, I personally brought 50 to 60 kids every Sunday night in my van to Awanas. I would make 5 or 6 trips down to the Escambia Arms, to the ghetto, you know. People say, "Aren't you afraid to go in there?" Well, I suppose a little bit, but man, I enjoyed, and still enjoy, meeting with black people. They're friendly. You go to the door, you knock on the door, "Hey, come on in." They've never seen you in their life. They'll invite you in. Sit down, talk to them. They'll ask you for supper, you know, all kinds of stuff. I've knocked on who knows how many doors as, you know, an avid soul winner for 30-some years now. But I really enjoyed working in the black neighborhood. But one night, I couldn't sleep, so about 2 in the morning, I got up, and I went down to my bus route in Texas, Longview, Texas. Some drunk had been driving late that night and thought he was going down the street, and instead he turned down the railroad track. He drove a short distance down the track, car bottomed out, stuck on the rails, you know. So several people stopped, and I saw the commotion, so I stopped my car. And we're trying to help push this car off of this railroad track before some train comes along, you know. And of course, the drunk guy standing there by the car, wondering, what's going on around here. And I got talking to this guy. We're trying to push this car off the tracks, you know. And he says, "What are you doing out here in this neighborhood?" He said, "That's all black neighborhood over there." I said, oh yeah, I know most of those folks, they ride my bus to church. I come in here all the time, visit with them, love them. He said, church, what do you take them to church for? I said, well, we get them saved, and teach them how to love the Lord and serve God and do what's right. He said, saved? He said, black people don't have souls. I said, are you part of the KKK? He said, yeah, how'd you know? Well, just a lucky guess, I don't know if all KKK members believe that, but this guy did, and a lot of them do. That black people are animals. They don't have a soul. Now, where on earth would an idea like that come from? Evolution. They haven't evolved far enough. The white man is superior. The Bible says in Acts chapter 17, and hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth. Now, there are definitely distinct characteristics of the different racial groups, if you want to call them racial groups, okay? No question, all right? I've dealt with the Japanese when I was in Japan, and they're often very polite, very sweet, very mild-mannered, very humble, but there's kind of a pride because they're humble, and they resist the American gospel in many ways. I was over there, and pastors will work there for 20 years to get a church of 10 people. They don't want it. They look at American news, everybody's killing everybody. They don't have that problem in Japan. I mean, they're 10 times more crowded than we are. And their crime rate is way down. They don't want what we got. You want us to accept American gospel? No thanks. We don't want what you've got. So different racial groups, no question, have certain characteristics about them. The Indians with the high cheekbones, the Norwegians with the blonde hair, et cetera, et cetera. But we're all descended from Adam and then later from Noah's family. So there's no reason to be a racist. Darwin said, a married man is a poor slave, worse than a Negro. Now, I won't ask how many of you agree with that statement, but the fact is, if a professor said that today, how long would he keep his job? Or his life? Yeah, not long, right? And yet Darwin is touted in schools as one of the great, heroes, one of the great scientists of the world. He was a racist. He was a woman hater. He finally married his first cousin. Nobody else would take him, apparently. Darwin wanted to raise a race of purebreds, great. He thought if you marry close to the family line, he thought, since I'm so great, I'll marry somebody closely related to me. And we'll produce, super kids. Well, it didn't work. Okay, you get a bunch of rednecks when you do that these days. Darwin. Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Darwin said, the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the two sexes is shown by man's attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than can woman. Whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of the senses and hands, the average of mental power in man must be above that of women. See, after Darwin wrote his book, Origin of Species, he later wrote another book called The Descent of Man. He actually wrote several books, okay? Progressively more atheistic. In his first edition of Origin of the Species, you can tell which edition you're reading by looking at the last sentence in the book. First edition says, it ends with the words, I forget the whole paragraph now, but you can tell by this progression of animals or something that these things were created. Then in the second or third edition, they changed it to evolved. And there were 6 editions, I believe, altogether. And the first one, or at least the first one, maybe the first 2, have the word created in there. Then they took that out. It became evolved. But in his book, Descent of Man, Darwin also said on page 588, thus man has ultimately become superior to woman, poetry, strength, voice, etc. Darwin believed in inbreeding. He married his maternal father's granddaughter, who was also his mother's niece, which makes her his first cousin, okay? Which is illegal in all but 3 states here in America. The best man in my wedding, good friend of mine through school, went to a church that believed a few things a little strange, and they had to marry somebody of their own faith. Well, there aren't many of that particular, kind of real narrow faith, so he married his first cousin. He had to go to North Carolina to do it, I believe. Only a few states allow first cousin marriages. Almost all states, it has to be at least second cousin or further distant, just so you don't have genetic problems. Here's what happens. The chromosomes in your body is like a ladder from here to Chicago. It's twisted up. Okay? Each rung of the ladder is called a gene. And there are millions and millions and millions of them. Man currently has about at least 3,500 defective genes. Kind of like in your computer, you may have a program that's got a bad file. Well, the computer can work anyway, okay? You might have a few broken wrenches in your toolbox, but you can still, you know, work with stuff. And there are about 3,500 defective genes in the average human gene pool. If you marry close to your bloodline, the probability of the same genes being defective are very high. So you are more likely to produce deformed children. That's just though it's a Russian roulette with 3 bullets in the chamber, you know. Not a good way to do it. Darwin married his first cousin, okay? He wanted to produce a superior stock. This is from the book In the Minds of Men by Ian Taylor, which is also just an awesome book. I mean, it's huge, but we sell it through our ministry, and it's just a tremendous book. They had 10 children. Mary died shortly after birth. Anne died at age 10. Robert was born retarded and died at 19 months. Henrietta had a serious breakdown at age 15. 3 of his other 6 sons were ill so often, Charles regarded them as semi-invalids.
Nice race of thoroughbreds.
As your race of thoroughbreds, all right. Okay? Ask anybody that raises cats or dogs or anything. If you allow them to breed back very, very close to the family line, you start to get some real strange things happening. You know, a lot of the hybrid dogs, Chihuahuas for instance, you know, they're schizo. Run around, yip, 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 all day long. The only cure is duct tape or a ball bat, you know. Shut up, dog, okay? I don't recommend that. I've never done that to a dog. Some skeptic's going to get this tape and say, oh, Hovind believes in beating dogs. No, I don't. All right, so racism ties right in. Look on page 61 here. This whole section is about how the evolutionary theory in the book A Long War Against God, how the evolutionary theory and racism just go hand in glove. Now, evolution didn't cause racism, and racism didn't cause evolution, but they certainly support each other. Okay? All through here you see quotes by major evolutionists about how racism and how all the major evolutionists of the 1900s were racist, which was acceptable. I mean, we still had white bathrooms and black bathrooms here in the South just 40 years ago. Right? You'd see signs, colored only. Pekin, Illinois, right near where I grew up. We've been through Pekin 1,000 times, you know. Used to have signs on the edge of the city. Black man, don't let the sun set on you here. That's in my lifetime. The town we were in yesterday, Eric, you know,
Yeah,
they don't allow blacks.
still,
Today. 2001, you know. There was one black kid at church last night, wasn't there?
I was surprised.
Yeah, the only black one in the whole town. And
Well, they lived about 45 miles away.
oh, lived along. They had to bus them in. Yeah.
Jay, Florida had that sign.
Jay, Florida had a sign like that?
Just not long ago.
Till not long ago. Wow. Well, the KKK is still real strong, you know, in some areas. That type of mentality, though, that because of a person's skin, he's inferior. Well, that's just flat stupid, okay? There's no scientific evidence to back that up. And that drives prejudice, you know, into people. And that just is sad that so many kids are raised with thinking that, you know. Dad teaches them that, and so they're going to believe it. Okay. Now, you can read through this if you'd like. Look at the quote in the middle of page 62, though. The Negroid stock is even more ancient than the Caucasian and Mongolian, as may be proved by an examination not only of the brain and of the hair, of the bodily characteristics such as teeth, genitalia, the sense organs, but the instincts, the intelligence. The standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of the 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. This is Henry Fairfield Osborn, that was on the quiz from last week, the curator at the American Museum of Natural History. He was the guy who was going to introduce, this was one of the things they were going to introduce as evidence in the 1925 Scopes monkey trial. He was the guy going to bring in Piltdown Man as evidence for evolution at the Scopes monkey trial. This is Henry Fairfield Osborn, who was a big brand name evolutionist of his day. Now, evolutionists today have worked very hard to distance themselves from this kind of teaching. They will usually say, yes, they taught that 100 years ago, but we don't believe that anymore. And that's, hopefully that's correct, okay? But the fact is, this is just history. This is the way it was. Okay, racism and evolution go hand in glove. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how evolution is the foundation for communism. Switch gears here. All right. Before we do that, though, racism, of course, is a great way to get some people to kill other people. Great way. And that's one of Satan's goals. Lower the population to 0. Kill everybody. Now, God doesn't allow Satan himself to do it, so Satan has to get some of his assistants to do the dirty work for him. And so one of Satan's goals is get people to kill other people, and that's racism is a great way to do it, and evolution ties right into that. Okay, let's see how communism goes in with evolution. Humanist Manifesto was written in 1933. Good quiz question. That's the first Humanist Manifesto. They wrote a second one in 1973. Basically says a lot of the same stuff. Okay? Humanists here are declaring that they are a religion. Over and over in the Humanist Manifesto, which you can still buy from Prometheus House, I believe, is the name of the publisher, wherever that's at. I forget. I've got Humanist Manifesto in my library. But they start off by saying, you know, this is religious humanists. All through this document, they call themselves religious humanists. The courts have declared humanism is a religion. Humanism, basically, there's only two choices, okay? Two kinds of religions in the world, if you can call it that. There are those that say there's a God, and he tells us what's right and wrong. Now, who that God is it Allah or Buddha or Jehovah? You know, all kinds of them, okay? We believe we've got the right one. Of course, they believe they've got the right one. But the fact is, there are those religions who teach there is a God, and he decides right from wrong. And all we got to do is find out what he wants and do it. Other religion says there's no God. If there is no God, then who's in charge? That's basically the question. Who is in charge? Now, we will see later how important this question is when we see what's happening with the New World Order and with our money supply, Federal Reserve notes. We're going to get into a lot of interesting things. Redeeming the straw man, income tax, which is voluntary, by the way, for most Americans, which we'll get into later. That's why I said this class is going to be very politically incorrect. I happen to strongly believe God's in charge. He owns this place. If there is no God, though, that brings up an interesting question. You know, who's in charge? I asked an atheist student one time in Pennsylvania. He sat in the school, in the class, in the auditorium, when I spoke to the auditorium there in Pennsylvania. He said, Mr. Hovind, I'm an atheist. I said, really? He said, yeah, there is no God. I said, well, then tell me, son, how do you decide right from wrong? He said, that's easy. He said, I decide what's right and wrong because, he said, I couldn't believe he said this. He said, I'm the God of my own universe. I said, man, I'm glad to hear that, son, because I'm going to shoot you in 5 minutes. He said, you can't do that. I said, oh, yeah, I can. You see, I'm the God of my own universe. You know, if evolution is true, then man is God. We're it. That's exactly what humanism says. Humanism basically says, look, there is no God, therefore man is God. We have evolved the farthest, so we decide what's right. This didn't start with Charles Darwin by a long shot. The history in this book is so good about that. Henry Morris goes clear back to talk about even guys like Aristotle and Plato, who had their chain of being. You know, man is at the top. Under that is woman. Under that is animals. And if a man doesn't study philosophy, he'll come back as an animal. And if he's a cowardly man, he'll come back as a woman when he gets reincarnated. You know, something like that. It was so stupid. But the whole thing is this chain of being where man is the ultimate authority. This is the foundation idea behind democracies. Let's get all the people together and let's vote on what's right and wrong. Well, that whole thinking is fundamentally flawed. If there's a God, then God decides what's right and wrong. We don't get together and decide right and wrong. And a lot of politicians, you know, try to decide right from wrong by You know, which way is the wind blowing? You know, how do you tell? Which way is most of you going? Majority opinion is a dumb way to tell right from wrong. You got to have a book. Thus saith the Lord. This is right, this is wrong. If you don't have that, you really have a problem. You're like a ship in a storm with no anchor and no sail, no direction, no compass, no way to tell what's right and wrong. And that's the problem in America today, and that's the problem with American kids today. They don't have a guide and a compass. Here's how I tell right from wrong. Kids that are raised in Christian homes don't always turn out right, but most of them at least know there's a right and a wrong, and they know why. Now, whether they choose it or not is another story. But kids that are raised with the humanist idea that, you know, man is God, how are they going to tell right from wrong? Maybe that's why there's such a high percentage of immorality, premarital sex, you know, abortion, divorce, on and on and on. Go back to seminar part 1, you know, all the evils. So, Humanist Manifesto, number 1. This is the first tenet. This is what they start off. I think there were 10 planks in their manifesto, or 10 tenets. First one, humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Well, guess what that says? There's no God. Therefore, that makes us God. We're in charge. That's the Humanist Manifesto, plank number 1. Communism and humanism and evolution are triplets. Okay, they all go together. You can't have communism without evolution. Last week I spoke in 6 different Russian churches in, where was I? Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington. The Russian whole system of communism that caused untold suffering to those people is based on evolution. The solution to fix Russia's problems is creation evangelism. Get the gospel in there and bring in the idea there's a creator. See, we had people come to America, the immigrants came to America for, you know, hundreds of years, and many of them brought with them what's called a Protestant work ethic. There's a God, I shouldn't steal, I should work hard, I should, you know, I should get the fruit of my own labor. The harder I work, the luckier I get. And that Protestant work ethic, as it's called, says, look, just work hard, don't steal from anybody, do right, and, you know, eat the fruit of your own labor. Drink water out of your own cistern, the Bible says. Okay, well, after the quick break here, we'll get into more on how communism and evolution tie together. And this will take quite a while as we go through the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto and the 8 rules of revolution that the communists have for taking over a country. And we're going to get bogged down on some of these, I am sure. But feel free to ask any questions if you'd like. Okay, quick break. Let's explain a little bit how communism, humanism, Marxism, named after Karl Marx, and evolutionism tie together. By the way, I do a lot of debates, and they always say it's creationism versus evolution. You ever notice that? I say, no, it's evolutionism versus creation. I always put the ism on evolution on purpose. This fellow said, do humanists believe in a supreme being? Emphatically, yes. That supreme being is man. Humanists have no knowledge of any being more supreme. They will call themselves an agnostic. They will say, I can't prove there's no God, I just don't know. Agnostic is from the Greek word where we get our word ignoramus. I don't know. How appropriate, yes, agnostic, ignoramus, okay? I don't know. And guys like Huxley would not claim to be atheists, and a lot of professors today would not really claim to be atheists, they would claim to be agnostics, which means they just don't know. So make that a quiz question. What does agnostic mean? Don't know, or ignoramus. Either one would be sufficient there. In the American Humanist magazine, this fellow said, the turning point in history will be the moment man becomes aware that the only God of man is man himself. Now watch this philosophy carefully, because this is exactly what is spreading around our United Nations. That man is God. And you're going to see the worship of Mother Earth, or the worship of environment, as probably the world religion coming soon. What's happening in the United Nations is scary, because they really have this idea, there is no God, therefore, we must be it. So we will get together and decide and vote on right and wrong. The communist, ACLU, I jokingly call it the American Communist Lawyers Union, started by a guy named Roger Baldwin, who said very clearly the goal of this organization is to further communism. That's what the ACLU started for. So I call it the American Communist Lawyers Union. That's their stated goal. We covered that a little bit more on videotape number 1 of our series. Karl Marx, originally named Moses Mordecai Marx Levy.
You're not going to have another quiz.
No. But when he was 17 years old, he wrote a beautiful paper telling how much he loved the Lord. In order to graduate from high school, you had to give your testimony, or something to that effect, and so he wrote great paper. Then Karl Marx went off to college. And in college, his philosophy was destroyed by a professor who turned him on to the pre-evolutionary ideas. You know, this was just before Charles Darwin wrote his book, but evolution was rampant before that. You know, Darwin just gave a mechanism for how it can work. See, Darwin is only famous for supplying the mechanism. A lot of people already believed in evolution. They didn't know how it worked. Darwin said, well, it works by natural selection. Oh, brilliant idea. Yep, we'll take it. That was basically what happened. So you can't say evolution started with Darwin by a long shot. Karl Marx later said, my objective in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. Now, as we study Karl Marx here for a few minutes, everything that he did from this time on in his life was anti-Christian. If God was for it, he was against it. And you won't understand his 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and you won't understand the communist mindset until you see how evolution ties in.
So when was he alive?
I don't know when he died, but in mid-1800s, okay? He wrote his manifesto, and Brian and I were just arguing about this today. Was it 1846 or 1848? One of the dates, the date on our website is right. The date in my seminar, it's one of my slides, is wrong. I think it's 1848 is the correct date, but I'll look it up and check it out. One atheist said, you shouldn't trust anything Hovind said because he got the wrong date on something. You know. Oh, I said Congo was taken over by Belgium in 1880, and it was 1885. Therefore, everything else I say is not good. That's the kind of thinking these guys have, you know. Anyway, this professor at E.O. Wilson is a biologist at Harvard University, has taught for 4 decades. He said, as were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in the fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolution theory. And now he has been destroying students for 35 or 40 years at Harvard University that come through his class. And just about every kid that goes to a secular university, even University of West Florida here, in the middle of the Bible Belt, you know, Pensacola, Florida, there will be at least one professor who thinks it's his duty in life to destroy that kid's faith going through school. And a very high percentage of kids get their faith destroyed going through school. Professor Wentworth, he said, when I entered Harvard in the fall of 1924, I was not only a Christian, I was also an avowed candidate for the ministry. Then for 4 years I underwent a process of mental readjustment which shook my little world to its foundations. Through it all, only one thing was clear to me. If I could reconcile religion with intelligence, I knew that I could go on into my chosen career, fortified by the experience. If I could not, every consideration of honor would compel me to make other plans. In the end, I gave up the ministry. College education turned him away from serving God. I got a letter just last week, 2 weeks ago. This fellow said, Dr. Hovind, until I went to college, my faith in God was sound, but my college history class helped to destroy that faith. I started to doubt the Bible and God's Word. I even started to doubt Jesus was truly God's Son, and that He died and rose for my sins. My best friend showed me your tapes, and I was in awe of what I saw. Everything I thought I knew about life was changed. Praise God. But how many, right now, tonight, while we're sitting here, how many hundreds of thousands of students are doing homework for a college class that is destroying their faith, and their insides are just being eaten up with this doubt because some professor gave them a hard time all day today, and nobody has given them any ammunition to teach the truth. I am so convinced this evolution theory is not just dumb, it's dangerous. What happens, Satan is using this theory, of course, to keep people from hearing the gospel. Many people refuse to even listen. When I tried to witness to my brother's best friend, Mike, who lived just the next street over from us when I was growing up, I tried to witness to Mike, and he was going to college in Peoria, Illinois there, and he started telling me all about evolution. He said, I'm sorry, I don't need your gospel, I don't need your Jesus, because, I'm going to college, Evolution is how we got here. And I couldn't get anywhere with him. I was a brand new Christian myself, sophomore in high school, he's a sophomore in college, and I didn't know how to witness to him. That was one of the events, I guess, in my life that caused me to start getting interested in finding an answer to this, because this evolution theory is hindering folks from coming to listening to the gospel, for one thing. Those that are already saved and then go off to college like these guys and get their faith destroyed end up being unfruitful. The professor here, Wentworth, for instance, he's going to heaven. He's going to be there with all of us. But how many folks is he bringing with him? Probably none. What about Wilson, the biologist at Harvard University? How many souls has he led to the Lord, do you think, in the last 40 years? How many could he have led to the Lord had somebody not destroyed his faith at Alabama University of Alabama? The Bible's real clear on this, Matthew 18:6, you better be, if you offend one of these little ones that believe in me, you'd be better off with a millstone hanged about your neck and drowned in the depth of the sea. This is a serious offense. Interesting quote here. Christianity has fought and still fights and will fight science to the desperate end over evolution. Because evolution destroys utterly and finally the very reason Jesus' earthly life was supposedly made necessary. Destroy Adam and Eve and the original sin, and in the rubble you will find the sorry remains of the Son of God. Take away the meaning of his death. If Jesus is not the Redeemer who died for our sins, and this is what evolution means, then Christianity is nothing. The American Atheist Magazine, 1978. And they're right. If evolution is true, Christianity is nothing. Jesus died on the cross for no reason. He's just another martyr for a cause. This battle, now I want you to notice what this guy said. Now he's writing this in the American Atheist Magazine, okay? Look back at the first sentence here. Christianity has fought, still fights, and will fight science to the desperate end. No. We don't fight science. We fight evolution because we feel it's not part of science. But even in his quote, you can see trying to sneak evolution as part of science. Evolution is not part of science. Evolution is a fairy tale. It's a religion that people believe in because they don't like the other alternative. But from the book video, Let My Children Go, which is tremendous, they said in there 75% of children raised in Christian homes who go to public college and public schools will reject the Christian faith by their first year of college. 75%. I remember my first day in sociology class at Illinois Central College. I was a little scared anyway, first day in college, High school's a little more secure. You go to college and it's just kind of a whole new world. Here we are in sociology class. This fellow with real long hair growing around the fringe and bald in the center is going to be our teacher for the class. He said, okay, students, are there any Christians in the room? I raised my hand. He said, what's your name? I said, Ken Hovind. He said, Mr. Hovind, so you're a Christian, huh? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, tell me, can your God do anything? I said, yes, sir. By the way, that's not true, okay? God can't learn. He already knows it all. He can't lie. He can't do anything. He can't sin. But I didn't know any better, so I said, yes, God can do anything. And he said, well, tell me, Mr. Hovind, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? Now this guy already had it planned out, a whole sequence of questions to ask to destroy any Christians that came through his class. He'd been doing it for years. There are professors in just about every university that have this mentality that it's their job to destroy any kid that comes through their class. Destroy their faith. They're out there. The woods are full of them. Okay? Those guys ought to get an honest job picking peaches or changing tires instead of destroying some kid's faith as he comes through their class. By the way, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? You're dealing with infinity here. I've learned how to answer the question now. Jesus often answered a dumb question with a question instead of an answer. I now say to him, you know what a line is? You know, in geometry, I taught geometry for years, a line is going forever in both directions. Never stops. They'll say, yeah, I know what a line is. Okay. A ray, this is a line. A ray goes forever in one direction. Starts at a point, goes forever in one direction. And they'll say, yeah, I know what a ray is. I say, okay, which is longer? Well, they're both infinite, okay? Neither one's longer than the other. And as far as, you know, the rock and God can make a rock. All I could say at the time, I said, God can make a rock so big you can't lift it. Which is still true, by the way. No, you can't. But there's so many kids. I mean, we get letters and calls here. I don't know how many emails I get. Probably close to 100 a day. Probably more than that. Martha filters through a lot of them first. But it's unreal how many folks write us and call us, or sometimes they're crying on the phone so hard they can't even talk, because our tapes give them back something that the professor took away when they went to college. You see that all the time when you're out speaking, you know. It's just like, wow, I wish I'd have had this information 10 years ago, you know. Because this is the center of the battlefield right here. This evolution theory is Satan's favorite tool to destroy people. Karl Marx based his philosophy of communism on evolution. Now, he was already thinking up these theories. Marx never worked a day in his life. He was a loser, okay? He was a bum. He was a moocher, okay? A leech. Sucked the blood out of everybody else. Never worked a day in his life. A guy named Engels, a rich guy from England, kept supplying him money so that Marx could think and write his theories. Marx was an absolute loser, okay? He had 6 children. 3 died of starvation in infancy. He wouldn't work, didn't have any grocery money. Kids died of starvation. 2 others committed suicide. Not a very successful father, I would say. Only 6 people attended his funeral when he died in 1883. When Darwin's book came out, Marx read the book, wrote a letter to Engels and said, Engels, this book by Charles Darwin is perfect to justify our theories of communism. This book takes away the need for God. Therefore, man is God. See, you cannot have communism and Christianity. They don't coexist. They can't. The 2 philosophies are mutually exclusive. Either there's a God that decides right from wrong, or man decides right from wrong. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. I have the date on here of 1848. I believe that's correct. The one on the website is the correct one. I'll fix this if this is not right. But he had 10 planks, 10 things that he believed. We'll go through one by one here. I'll give you plenty of time to write these down. His first plank of the Communist Manifesto was abolish private property. And we'll probably ask you on the quiz to pick any 3 or 4, and maybe some bonus if you can list more, of the planks of the Communist Manifesto. These are 10 ways to destroy a capitalist country, to destroy a Christian nation, and establish communism. See, now Peter, you were raised how long under Soviet Union?
8 years.
8 years, okay? And your family for generations back before that, right? Communism doesn't allow you to own private property. Finally, I don't know when, 1950s or something like that, so many people were starving under the communist work program. You know, they had these huge collective fields, you know, this 10 billion acres belongs to the government. Everybody go out there and work all day, you know. Who wants to go work on a field they're not going to get any result from? So even today, a huge percentage, I heard 70%, it may be more than that or close to that, of the food raised in Soviet collective farms never makes it to the table. It's either not harvested, oops, we forgot to harvest it, so it rots, or it's harvested and stored in huge piles and the rats eat a bunch of it, or the birds, they just store it in big piles, because it's not privately owned. If anybody that's ever owned a house and rented it out to somebody else will understand what I'm talking about. Okay? The owner has a different attitude toward his property than the renter does. In just about, there are rare exceptions to that, but that is certainly the rule. Okay, there may be exceptions. Under communism, you can't own property. Finally, when so many people were starving, they had to modify communism a little bit and said, okay, you can plant food only in your own little yard. And when I was over there, when you were in Ukraine, I suspect same thing, you know. People's little bitty front yard and backyard is loaded with vegetables. And they grow more stuff in 1/3 of an acre than the communists can grow on 10 acres. Because that's theirs. They're going to take care of it. They were debating on the radio here in Pensacola years ago about Hillary Clinton's health care plan. We ought to have universal health care. This guy's on the radio bragging about how good this would be. Man, everybody ought to have coverage. And they always have some sob story, you know. Some little old grandma in Arkansas doesn't have any health care, and, you know, she needs a surgery on her eye, and she's going to go blind. And I'm sure there's a lot of people suffer, okay, no question, right? But the philosophy is what I want you to get here. And they'll say, see, we ought to have coverage for these folks. And they were bragging about how good it would be to have universal health care. So I called into the radio station, like I do from time to time. I said, hey, fellas, I forgot to change oil in my car, and I blew the engine. No, it's not true, but I made up the story to see what they would do with this, you know. I said, I think everybody in Pensacola should help me pay for a new engine. If everybody chipped in, it only cost about $0.25 apiece. No big deal. And the announcer said, hey, if you forgot to change oil in your car, that's your problem. We shouldn't have to pay for a new engine for your car. I said, exactly right. Now let's go back and look at the health care issue. 70 to 80% of all health care costs, you can ask any doctor, 70 to 80% of the costs are from self-induced problems. They smoke, they drink, they take drugs, they live a wicked lifestyle, they don't take care of themselves, and when they get sick, they want me to help pay for it. That's exactly like saying, look, I don't want to change oil in my car, I don't want to take care of my car, but when it breaks, you got to help me pay for it. Well, that's flat stupid, okay? If we had universal auto care, anytime you need new tires, the government will buy them. Anytime you need a new engine, the government will buy them. How would you drive your car? You drive it bad enough now, son. I'd hate to see it then. How many of you have had your dad yell at you for leaving the lights on or leaving the water running too long? Just about everybody, right? Why? He pays the bill. Why aren't you worried about leaving the lights on? You're not paying the bill. That's exactly right. Let's have universal house care. The government pays all utility bills. Would you worry about shutting the door and leaving the air conditioner on? When the AC's on and it's hot outside, you would stand in the doorway and talk to your friends for hours at a time, wouldn't you? Because you like that nice cool breeze coming by. The thought would never occur to you, you know, this might cost me at the end of the month. That thought would never enter your mind. And with health care, the dumbest thing we could do would be universal health care. Because then people already don't take care of their health. It would be much worse. Much worse. If somebody wants to drink alcohol, that's their business. If they want me to pay when they get sick, now that's my business. People say, don't you feel sorry for them? Yes, I do. But if suppose nobody was allowed to have health insurance. First place, costs would come way down. When my son back there had his ingrown toenails cut out 6 or 7 times, finally the doctor said, I'm sorry, this isn't growing right. We're going to have to remove the toenails, the big toenails. I said, okay, doc. So we scheduled a time for surgery. He goes in for surgery. He's in there for an hour and a half. They put him to sleep, take off the toenails, bandage him up, go home. We get the bill. Anesthesiologist, $1,500 for putting him to sleep for an hour and a half. The room he sat in, they did surgery in. I forget what it was, like $1,000 or $1,200 or something like that, for an hour and a half. So I get all these bills, no insurance, total like $4,500. My wife can give you the details. I got these bills. I sat down, picked up the phone. I called the anesthesiologist. I said, listen, I'm a Christian. I pay my bills. But I just am having a hard time understanding $1,500 for an hour and a half. I mean, I got a doctor's degree too. I don't charge $1,500 for an hour and a half's work. The guy said, yeah, you're right, that's kind of high, let's make it 500. I didn't realize you didn't have insurance. Over the phone. Never have met the guy. Still haven't met him. Dropped it from 1,500 to 500. Called the doctor or the people who owned the little clinic. It wasn't even a hospital, a little outpatient thing, you know. $1,200 for an hour and a half. I know you got to change the sheets and, you know, get to buy some new bandages and stuff like that, but, you know, that's a little high, don't you think? I said, yeah, you're right, let's make it 400. We didn't realize you didn't have insurance. If nobody had insurance, medical costs would drop dramatically. Now, I'm not saying insurance is good or bad, okay? I'm just saying the fact is when people have it, costs go up and people take less care of their health. That's what communism does. First plank is abolish private property. The Bible's very clear. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 10. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession. What's happening here? Anybody know the story in Leviticus? What was the law they set up? How's it supposed to work? If you lose your property, you get it back in 50 years. Let's suppose, you know, Dad's a drunk. The family loses everything. They know in 50 years they're going to get their inheritance back. So, if you're having hard times, you can't pay your bills, and you want to sell 5 acres of your property, you can sell it to your neighbor until the year of Jubilee. So the neighbor's going to think, okay, we got 7 more years until he's going to get the property back. How much crops can I grow on that land? That land is only worth X amount of dollars because I can only have it for 7 years, or for 15 years, or for 25 years, or whatever it is. And they would prorate the value of the land based upon how long they're going to have it, because they know they're going to have to give it back. Ownership of private property is essential to freedom. Suppose in Soviet Union, you're not allowed to own property. What's your incentive for working? I hope you saw it when you were there, but I saw it. The lack of a work ethic. And now that communism has not collapsed, by the way, but now that they're giving the appearance that it has, a lot of people simply don't know how to work. They know how to stand in line. They know how to have the government provide for them. But they don't, you know, work for myself. You know, the mafia has just done horrible things over there. And the black market, you know what's happening in Ukraine and in Russia over because of this thing. In 1 Kings, chapter 4, the Bible says, and Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his own his fig tree, from Dan to Beersheba. This, in the Jewish mind, is the idea of everything's fine. I got my own vine, I got my own fig tree, I got my own property, I'll take care of my family. Freedom is impossible without ownership of private property. And I taught my kids from the time they were little bitty, if this toy, you know, I see some parents, well, you better share your toy with your brother. I really thought about that long and hard. And I said, yeah, I do want my kids to share. However, I also want to teach them property ownership. I'm sorry, Ken Andrew, that is Eric's toy. You better learn to negotiate with him, or deal with him, or offer to trade him, or be nice to him, or ask to borrow it. But I'm not going to force him to share his toy with you. That's his toy. I guess to me, the property ownership principle was important to get into my kids. And I see kids get spankings, you know, because they won't share. Well, I don't know if I'd say, I guess you're getting borderline communism there, you know, making them share. It's, hey, it belongs to him. If he don't want to share it, that's his business. You know, I'm disappointed you don't share it. However, it is yours. Do with it as you please. And even in my own family, we each own our own cars. If my son wants to borrow my car, or if I want to borrow his car, we have a mileage rate. Otherwise, there's hard feelings. How many parents, kid borrows the car, drives it around, uses up all the gas, and thinks he does Dad a favor by filling up the gas tank? Well, that's only 1/4 of the cost of operating a car. You know, what about the tires you wore out, you know, 1%, or eventually the transmission's going to go bad, or something. You know, all these expenses catch up with you at once, and the fact that you drove it 400 miles to Grandma's, you may not see that expense now, but I will see that expense, you know, in a few years. Something's going to wear out. Certainly you're going to depreciate the value of the car. Buy a $20,000 car, drive it 200,000 miles. How much is a car with 200,000 miles worth? Zero, right? You put them in the junkyard. Yeah. So just depreciation, you went from $20,000 to nothing. That's what, 10 cents a mile?
It's just depreciation.
It costs 10 cents a mile just depreciation. When you look at a car and you're going to buy a car, it says 1996 Ford Mustang, 50,000 miles. Wow. 1996 Ford Mustang, 150,000 miles. What does that do in your thinking to the value of this car?
Drops dramatically.
Well, guess what? It dropped 1 mile at a time. The more you drive it, the less it's worth. That's just plain and simple. So, private property ownership is essential. Karl Marx said, no, you have to take away private property. Communism won't work if people have private property. Our founding fathers had a philosophy in this country. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness was the slogan. Now, that was a mistake, okay? The original slogan was life, liberty, and property. Property ownership. The whole principle behind being able to defend yourself is the fact that you own your body and you can defend your body. If somebody breaks into your house to do harm to you and you shoot them, you're fine. Audubon Society, the president, Peter Burrell, said, we reject the idea of private property. Well, this guy has a communist mentality, whether he knows it or not, whether he understands it or not, he's thinking like a communist. Here's a pledge some mother sent me from her 3rd grade class in Massachusetts. The kids had to color this. I pledge allegiance to the earth, which I do love and depend on, and to all life on land, air, and sea, which is as much a part of the earth as me. We're teaching kids that the earth belongs to everybody. It's not fair for you to own your own property. And the whole idea behind the slow encroachment of government requiring permits for all sorts of things, you know. Man, our founding fathers 200 years ago would have started a war. I mean, I got to get a permit. I got to get your permission to build my house? Forget you. This is my property. That was so strongly ingrained in them, and that now is being weeded out. You're seeing, at building your house, how many permits you have to get. And we're seeing here in our ministry, which is under a church, not a 501c3 corporation, a church, and we did not get permits when we built our buildings. And they give us a hard time. They don't understand. Well, we're going to help them understand. You simply have no authority over a real church. 99% of the churches in America think that they're real New Testament churches, and they're not. They've asked the government for permission to exist. They become a 501c3 corporation. That's not a church. It's like in Soviet Union, there are 2 kinds of churches. The free church and the state church. Most churches in America are state churches and don't even know it. We'll get into more of that later. All right, next week we'll talk more about communism and the philosophy and how it's so dependent on the theory of evolution, and it'll take us quite a while to get through communism, maybe the next 20 classes, I don't know, but we're going to see some things that are very politically incorrect, including why none of you have any money. We'll get into that later on. Thank you so much. See you next week. Welcome to class number 6 of our series from Creation Science Evangelism, CSE Class 103. We're covering how the evolution theory has affected the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, Nazism, all sorts of things, and it's going to take us a while to get through this whole session. We left off last week talking about Karl Marx, who wrote the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. We talked about plank number 1, abolish private property. You need to understand everything Karl Marx did and thought after he got believing in evolution, well, everything seemed to be anti-God. Like if God's for it, I'm against it. That seemed to be kind of his attitude. And everything he did in his 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto was against what Scripture teaches, unconstitutional according to the American Constitution. Most of these things are. And so what we're going to cover tonight on income tax was going to be surprising to some, and others will say, yay, go get him, Brother Hovind. Some other Christians might say, oh, you shouldn't talk about that. Well, my philosophy is everybody should obey the law, including the government. Right? Real simple. I have not filed any income tax in 28 years. If there's a law requiring me to file some, I would like to see it. I have the entire Internal Revenue Code right here, thoroughly marked up, indexed. You're welcome to check out anything. I know the subject pretty well. I've been a long-time student of this topic, as my son would be glad to tell you. This is something I read a lot on because I want very badly to be right with God. The Bible says, render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. I agree. It does not say render to Fred that which is Caesar's. Okay, if something belongs to Caesar, I'll give it to him. I'm not against that at all. So what we're going to cover tonight, just briefly, because I have read enormous amounts of information on this and could talk for years on it. However, I have other dragons to slay. I don't have time to fight this one too long because to me there's other topics that are more important. Karl Marx invented what we call the graduated income tax. The more you make, the more they take. That's Karl Marx's idea. He knew what would happen. As people got richer, they would find loopholes and end up paying nothing. The poor people wouldn't make enough to pay anything, and the purpose of the income tax is to wipe out the middle class. The middle class ends up paying the burden of the income tax. The poor people pay very little, the rich people pay almost none. So his idea was a heavy progressive, that's a key word, income tax, which means the more you make, the more they take. On my website, drdino.com, under frequently asked questions, we have a question. It's about question number 40, but we add new numbers all the time, so it may not stay number 40, about how the IRS is tied into communism, socialism, and evolution, ultimately. See, God's method was very simple in Scripture. Each person paid a certain amount. Actually, in some cases, there were instances where they paid 10%. 10% went to support the Levites, the Christians of the day, and 10% went to support the government. Just flat tax. Everybody pays 10%. Okay? Karl Marx said, no, if you have a graduated income tax, then this will slowly discourage people from being honest. They'll figure out some way to lie, cheat, steal if they can, you know. And I sure don't want to be dishonest. It'll also encourage people that get to the top to look for loopholes, and this is actually going to wipe out the middle class. See, under communism, you can only have two classes of people, the very rich and the very poor. Go to just about any country where they have communism, where it's been in control for a long time, and you'll see this very same thing. There aren't three classes, there's two, the super rich and the extremely poor. There are many good websites that can give you information on this topic. George Hansen, former representative from Idaho in Congress, he wrote this book, To Harass Our People. He said, this is the purpose of the IRS, to harass our people. The purpose of the IRS is to gather information, not to gather money. None of the money goes to support the federal government. It goes to pay the debt, the interest on the national debt. We'll get into more of that in a minute on money. The best book I know on the topic, if you want to get into more, is Otto Skinner's book, The Biggest Tax Loophole of All. Very simply, he says, look, the code says clearly, if you are liable for a tax, you should pay it. Read your 1040 form very carefully this next time when you fill one out. It says, you must file a form for every tax for which you are liable. There's the key. Has Congress made you liable? Here are all the laws where Congress has said the following people are liable to pay. None of them apply to an individual earning money in most normal ways that people earn money. If you are manufacturing alcohol, tobacco, or firearms, you're supposed to pay. I can show you the code on that. If you have oil wells in a foreign country, then you're supposed to pay. Just, if I said, Jeff, I will trade you my shirt for your shirt. That's not income for you. It's not income for me. We traded. If you say, Brother Hovind, I will trade you 40 hours of my time for $400, that's not income for either one of us either. Now, if the doctor has gone to school all these years and he thinks his time is worth $200 an hour, and he says, hey, I'll trade you 15 minutes of my time for $50 for an appointment, That's not income. That's a trade. And Congress has ruled on, and judges and courts have ruled on this many times. That's exactly correct, okay? Income is corporate profits. So what they've done, see, an individual earning money, just trading his time or labor for money, is not income and is not taxable. So it's been real slick the way they've done this. They've given every person in the United States, at least, has a straw man that they have created for you, which is a corporation. Now, corporations are taxable. Real people would not be. And it's really slick how they've done this. We'll get into more of that in a minute. But if you want more on the website, on our website, drdino.com, there's about a 30-page letter, and we add to it all the time. You might want to get a hold of Joe Sweet's book, Good News, Bad News. Good news for Form 1040 filers, bad news for the IRS. It's voluntary. He goes through all the laws here. Irwin Schiff, a few things I would differ with Irwin Schiff, but he's written prolifically on the topic, how anyone can stop paying income tax, the Social Security swindle, how you can drop out, the biggest con, the federal government is fleecing you. Irwin Schiff has written lots and lots of books on the topic and is very knowledgeable. I think he's got a few things incorrect in what he's doing, but he's successful. Okay, it works. Peter Kershaw's book, In Caesar's Grip, is one of the most riveting books I've read in some time on how churches have gotten trapped by becoming 501c3 corporations. See, the church, the Congress shall make no law, First Amendment, affecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I like to ask them sometimes, what part of no law don't you understand? It says no law. Now, if a county passes a law that says we want churches to be taxed or whatever, just because the county passes a law, the courts have been clear on this. 16 American jurisprudence, I can look up the code for you, I've got it on my desk, but says very clearly, if a law is unconstitutional, the unconstitutionality of that law starts the moment the law is passed. You don't have to wait till it's proven to be unconstitutional. If it goes against the Constitution, it's not a law at all. And you're not under no obligation to obey it. So if a church gets incorporated, now they've put their head in a noose, because now they have to abide by all sorts of rules and regulations, because they're not really a church, they're now a corporation. The government gives corporations the right to exist. And that's what has happened in the last 100 years. Many churches have become incorporated. If a church is not incorporated, it's just a real, true New Testament church. They answer directly to God. The church does not have permission from God to give away God's authority. So since our ministry here, Creation Science Evangelism, is under the auspices of Faith Baptist Fellowship, an unincorporated church, I don't have God's permission to put God under some other sovereign. Okay? It's a sovereignty issue. If you got on board a Chinese ship out here in the harbor, you're under Chinese law. As soon as you cross over that railing of the ship and board the ship, you're under Chinese law, even if it's an American harbor. The church is sovereign because God is sovereign, and we're doing God's work, so we're under His authority. As long as we're under His authority, we're fine. If a church, though, becomes incorporated, which 99% of them have done here in Pensacola even, and all over the country, they are now no longer truly a church. You heard the preachers get up and say, the head of the church is Jesus Christ. Oh yeah? Not yours, it's not. The head of your church is the federal government. They give rights to create corporations, and why do you ask permission from them to exist? Which is why a true church, we can go off on a lot of rabbit trails here, and I'm sure we'll get 1,000 phone calls. A true church should not get building permits. They should build better than the code. Obviously, you want to be safe. We're not trying to get out of anything or trying to save any money, but you simply cannot ask permission from a county to do something that belongs to God's church. Now, people argue about that. Now, our country was started 225 years ago by people who had the attitude of, King George simply is not the authority. I mean, churches split over should we be loyal to King George or should we, do what's right. And good people split over these issues. And I've read lots on the topic, and I certainly don't want to, I want very badly to be right with God. I don't want to disobey Scripture. I don't know of any Scripture I'm disobeying. I don't know of any law I'm disobeying on this topic. But I have not filed any income tax in 28 years. I don't keep any records. I'm not required to. There's no law requiring me to. If I did keep records, and if I did give that to the government and fill out a form, 1040 form, under penalty of perjury, you know, I hereby declare the following information is correct, that form becomes their evidence to prosecute me. Well, first place, the 14th Amendment outlawed slavery. Does the IRS pay you to keep records for them? Well, no. Now, why does that sound like slavery to me? You're doing their work for them and they're not paying you? Fifth Amendment says you don't have to offer evidence to incriminate yourself. Okay. Well, how do they know how much money you made? You told them when you filled out that form. They're going to audit 1 out of 3,000 returns, generally. Mine's not in the pile. My chances of being audited are 0 out of 1,000, or 3,000, or 10,000. They just won't do it. If they come to your door, there's all sorts of things you can do there, which is, again, a long story. I'm not the least bit afraid of the subject. I've read thoroughly on it. I'll go with anybody to the IRS and say, here, arrest me if I'm doing something wrong. Show me the law. I'm not breaking any laws. I'm trying very hard to obey God. But I also don't want to waste a lot of time on this topic. So I'm going to take 10 minutes, explain my position, and then leave. I'm sure we're going to get 1,000 phone calls. We've already got them. We have a 30-page letter on my website, or we'll send it to you in writing, you know, a typed-out version if you don't have access to the internet. And then in that letter are lists of, probably 20 people who can help you with the details, should you decide to, you know, retain your rights as a true American citizen. We'll get into more on who's an American citizen later. What I want to cover in this class, though, is Karl Marx invented this. Reagan, in one of his speeches, mentioned that Karl Marx was the founder of our income tax system in America. Interesting confession. Keeping in mind that Karl Marx was a strong believer in evolution and wanted to do anything he could to go against this book. See, according to this book, ownership of private property is extremely important. You can't really have freedom unless you own your own property. If you're renting, or if you don't own the property, you really can't have the type of freedom that God envisioned for His people, which is why He had the system of laws. But let's go on here now. So check the website if you want more information on that, or if you want to read some of my books, you're welcome to give me a call. I can tell you where to get them.
You want to mention the book Hush Money?
The book Hush Money is the shortened version of this book. This is an extremely thorough book dealing with churches and how they should not be incorporated and what to do if you are, and how the problems that come in. And I really enjoyed it. Peter Kershaw lives in Branson, Missouri. He also has 2 chapters out of this book, which he's put in a little booklet form called Hush Money, which we sell. We sell both of them on our website or in our ministry there. So it's just a short version of this bigger story. Okay, item number 3 in Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto was abolish the rights of inheritance. Item number 4 was confiscation of property rights. Item number 5 was a central bank. Now, you need to understand the history a little bit here. Back in 1800s, banking was a key, a big problem. The Bible says very clearly that the love of money is the root of all evil. There have always been people who wanted to control the entire money supply, and with that they know they can really control the country. The central bank was created in America in 1913. This book here, The Creature from Jekyll Island, is an awesome book if you really want to get into what happened. Jekyll Island is a resort island off the coast of Georgia. A bunch of super rich gazillionaires had a secret meeting there back in 1910, 11, 12, 13, somewhere in there. And they came up with a way to control the money of America. They said, what we want is a system of banks. The banks will issue the currency. And by us issuing the money, we can control and create inflation. We can create depressions whenever we want. But we don't want the people to know what's going on. So we have to give it a name that will make it sound like it is part of the government. So they give it a name called Federal Reserve. There's nothing federal about it, okay? It's not part of the federal government. The Federal Reserve is a private banking cartel of super rich guys who control the currency of America. It's really strange. The United States government prints these bills. Costs them about 3 cents a piece to print one. They give them to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve rents it back to the United States for 20 bucks plus interest. Congress has the authority, according to the Constitution, to coin money. And the word coin is very important. You stamp gold and silver into coins, and it was clearly spelled out how many ounces, or grams of gold would be considered $1, et cetera, et cetera. And as long as we were on the gold or silver standard, there were very few problems as far as runaway inflation and stuff like that. What's happened now that we have paper, they've taken away our gold and given us paper. The next step will be to take away the paper and give you electronic signal, which costs them nothing. That'll be a plastic card, debit or credit card, and the next step beyond that is a little chip which goes in your hand. Right now, you go to the store, they run your groceries over the scanner, you hand them your paper, and they take it, right? The day will come very soon when they're going to say, I'm sorry, we don't take paper, we only take credit card, electronic money. And then it won't be far on the heels of that it'll be, I'm sorry, if you don't have a chip, we just can't sell you anything. We're not equipped to take. The cash register will be gone at the store. Probably the clerk will be gone. Checkout lady. Just like the commercial they've had on TV a bunch of times. The guy's walking through the store stuffing things in his coat, How many seen that? The guy's got the big trench coat on as he's walking through. He's putting all kinds of things in his pockets. As he heads toward the door, the security guard is walking to meet him. And as he's just about to go out the door, the security guard grabs his arm and says, excuse me, sir, you forgot your receipt. Have you seen that commercial?
I haven't.
Oh, it's incredible. That's where we're headed, a cashless society. And it's going to sound, wow, this is great. Look, I don't have to carry my wallet. You can't have checks, stolen or no credit cards. And it's going to sound great, but you're going to lose every bit of privacy. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 here in America. The Bible says, love of money, root of all evil. So whoever controls the money has the power. And this goes right back to the evolution philosophy. Karl Marx knew if communism was to succeed, you have to have a central bank. The Bible says, the rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. Now you probably all think you have some money, but you don't. You have a debt note. This is a $20 debt note. This is not money. This is a symbol that we are in debt to the bankers, $20. This is a reminder. This is the note to remind us that it's due. And we owe them, I don't know, some people argue about how much it really is. Estimates range up to $17 trillion. Who knows how much it really is? But for centuries, the alchemists had tried to find a way to turn lead into gold. Lead is cheap. Gold is expensive. They were looking for ways in the laboratory to turn lead into gold. And the alchemy, thinking, alchemists, they slowly became today the chemists. And chemistry, of course, is a great science. I enjoy chemistry, but alchemists tried to figure out a way to turn lead into gold. They never did succeed. Okay? The bankers have discovered a way to do it. They start wars, and they finance both sides. We'll loan money to both sides of this battle. Okay? When the lead stops flying, the gold rolls in as interest on the national debt. Because now both countries owe money to, guess who? The bankers. So in one sense, they don't care who wins, because they're going to collect interest either way. Sometimes they'll try to control and make the right side win so that they'll make sure they get the interest out of both sides. During World War II, U.S. debt rose nearly 600%. Japanese debt rose 1,348% during the war. French debt rose almost 600%. Canadian debt rose 417%. Guess who we owe this money to? These bankers. There's several families of super rich gazillionaires. They have nearly all the money in the world, and they want it all. They have most of it, now they want the rest of it. And everybody right now, everybody's so blinded, they think, wow, I'm doing fine, I got lots of money in the bank. No, you don't have any money in the bank. You have debt notes in the bank. I'll show you how it worked. Nehemiah said, boy, we're in trouble because we have borrowed money. We put our sons and daughters into bondage to be servants. Right now, the national debt is such that our great-great-great-great-grandchildren won't be able to pay it off. And without getting into all we can talk there's whole seminars for years and years on the topic of what is real money and how to fix the national debt problem. Lincoln decided rather than borrow money from these bankers, he would print treasury notes. See, the Congress has the authority to print or coin money. To coin money they do. So Lincoln printed these greenbacks, which have no debt attached to them. Why should we print money and then rent it from these bankers? Why doesn't Congress just print money? Why do the bankers have to be involved at all? Well, the reason they're involved is because the United States that we are dealing with here, when it says United States on here, that's not the real United States. That's a United States corporation. That's the corporate United States, not the real United States. We'll get into that in a minute here. But we traded our real money, silver and gold, for paper. Soon, those who control all this are going to make us trade the paper for plastic, and then the plastic for an embedded microchip. That's apparently the way it's going to go. The Bible prophesied in the last days, of course, you would have to receive a mark to buy or sell. The Greek word for mark, Sanders, Carl Sanders. Yeah, a friend of mine from Arkansas. He helped invent the little microchip, and now he's a Christian. He travels all over and speaks against, what's happening. It's warning people what's going on. Dean Martin here in Pensacola has quite a seminar on the microchip and really stays up to date on what's happening. You want to go in my office and get those microchips, Eric? If you sit at my desk on the right-hand side, I think they're taped on the side of my desk on the upper part. Bring a couple microchips out here. I'll need those in a minute. Okay, I want you to look at this $5 Federal Reserve note. I have it in my wallet. This is from 1928. Hey, Jeff, would you get this and read this right here out loud to everybody. 1928 $5 Federal Reserve note.
Redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury, or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank.
There, thank you, sir. Now, you better watch this carefully. The Federal Reserve had only been going now for about 15 years. It was started in 1913. People were nervous about this Federal Reserve back then, and they should have been. These are the bad guys, all right? It says, this note is redeemable in gold on demand at any United States Treasury. So I could have gone in and said, here, I want $5 worth of gold. Give me my $5 gold piece. The argument that was used was, gold is awful heavy to carry around in your pocket. Let's give you a piece of paper to carry, and we'll keep the gold in the bank for you. We'll warehouse it for you. Ah, thank you, sir. Here's one of the little microchips about the size of a grain of rice. That's the chip that you will see coming soon. Yeah, let's see if I can get a background where people can see that through that plastic bag. Here. Black backgrounds, that make it worse? Yellow background. There we go. Little bitty chip about the size of a grain of rice. Dean Martin came here and spoke to my staff here on the back porch, and he put one of these little chips under his arm, and he set up his laptop computer with a little sensor about the size of a pack of cigarettes plugged into the back of his computer. And he just walked past that sensor. As soon as he walked past, up on the screen of the computer came his name, address, social security number, bank account number, all of his files. The chip only holds a little alphanumeric number. It doesn't hold all this information, but it's the number. The number then triggers the computer, look up that file, and up comes everything on that person. They're getting technology better and better and better where they can read these farther and farther away. This little card, see, Steve, do you have your military mark card? You know how much information is kept in a military mark card? You have yours there, right? Really? The military is going to be the ones that they do this to first because they have a little more control over them. The next step, though, is make it for all the civilians. This is just a blank plastic card. I wrote Dean Martin's phone number on there, but this is actually a smart card. There's a computer chip in here. Dean? Yeah, you can see the access to it on here on the mark card. Unreal, the technology that's going on in these things. They can store enormous amounts of information in here. And you guys that are in the military, mark my words, no pun intended, the next step is you no longer have one of these cards. I don't know how long it's going to last. Probably not very long, another year or a few more years. And they'll say, if you join the military, you have to get a little chip under your skin. In your hand or your forehead. so that we can find you in case you're shot down. You know, there'll be some excuse, I'm sure, to make it worth doing, but that's what will happen. This is actually a computer card here, a computer circuit in this little card. You can call Dean Martin in Pensacola, 850-455-5011, if you want more information on the chip, because he speaks on that. But back to the money. What is money? Well, this says I can redeem this in gold. Redeem means trade it in, buy back. I can redeem it for gold at any United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money. Well, you mean this is not lawful money? I have to trade it in for lawful money? Isn't that what they're telling me? They're saying, hey, you can trade this in for lawful money anytime you want. Then in 1933, they called the gold in. March 6, 1933, Roosevelt declared to Congress that Congress of Governors that a national state of emergency existed. Who remembers what's going on in 1933 in America? Depression. The Depression was purposely caused in 1929, October 29. They purposely crashed the economy because they controlled the money through the Federal Reserve System. The Depression was deliberately engineered. Then, when people had suffered for a few years, they said, boy, have we got a deal for you. We've got the solution to your problems. Everybody come down and get a little number called a Social Security number. That's when it was introduced, during the Depression. Otherwise, people would have never got taken a number. By the way, Social Security is also voluntary. Okay? And I'll get 1,000 calls for that. Just read my website, please. It explains it all on there. He declared to the governors, he said, fellas, we have a state of emergency. The economy is falling apart. And he knew full well that it had been caused deliberately and could be stopped at any time. All they got to do is loosen up the money supply, let more money out. If they want to cause a depression, you tighten up the money supply. There's just not enough available out there. Everybody says, boy, I'd like to buy a house, but you know, I just don't have any money. Pretty soon all the hardware stores, well, nobody's buying stuff anymore. Lumber companies, well, nobody's buying our lumber, and it just trickles down very quickly and crashes the economy. So Roosevelt said, we have an emergency. I need special powers. I would like you governors to go back to your people and tell them that I need to have the authority to issue executive orders to fight war. See, during wartime, the Constitution is suspended, and the President can issue an executive order. How many have heard of executive orders before? Been quite a few of those flying out of the White House the last 10 years, haven't there? So they said, yep, we'll go back and recommend to the people that you be given emergency powers only as long as the emergency exists. So they declared a state of emergency in the mid-1930s, gave the President the power to issue executive orders in order to fight the enemy, which was the economy, which was a paper tiger. They had created it themselves, okay, created this enemy. Roosevelt said, now this is only to last during the state of emergency. Well, guess what? That was mid-1930s. It has never been lifted. We are still under state of emergency right now. What, 70 years later? So in 1933, March 9th, Congress voted to give the President of the United States and to the Secretary of the Treasury the emergency powers sanction to wage war through executive orders. The 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act was amended to include citizens. In other words, you can be a citizen of the United States and still be an enemy of the United States if you own gold. Anybody that owns gold is considered an enemy of the United States because, after all, the economy is hurting and the government needs the gold. Turn your gold in. We'll give you paper for it. And, you know, you keep this paper, we'll keep your gold. And if you don't, you're an enemy. You can be arrested. You can be arrested for having gold. Follow the yellow brick road. Remember that, okay? From Wizard of Oz, OZ, abbreviation for ounces, for gold. That movie was all about the same thing. So they declared the people enemies of the state if they owned gold. Now, here we have a Federal Reserve note from 1934. Let's see, Jeff, would you like to read what that says to us here? 1934 Federal Reserve note. Read that good and loud so we can get on the microphone here.
This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury or at any Federal Reserve Bank.
There we go. Thank you, sir. Notice it no longer says I can trade it in for gold. Did you catch that? 1928, you could trade it in for gold or lawful money. Now they just say you can trade it in for lawful money. Well, I'm still a little confused here. What is lawful money? If this isn't it, what can I trade it in for? One guy sent in one of these $5 Federal Reserve notes. He sent it into the Treasury and said, would you please redeem this for lawful money? They sent him back a Treasury note. Now the Treasury notes have red ink on the seal. You don't see many of those anymore, okay, but they used to be out. I remember as a kid, I don't have one. I may have one in my coin collection, but Treasury note. And the Treasury note said the same thing. You can redeem this for lawful money. So he sent it back. Said, please redeem this for lawful money. They sent him a letter back that says, please be advised, Congress has not decided what lawful money is. Well, that's just simply not true, okay? Lawful money is gold and silver. So I could trade this in for lawful money, they said. Now, in 1957, they were still issuing these. Notice the blue ink on the seal. The seal has blue ink. Now, the seal has black ink, right? You can get them with red ink, blue ink, black ink. I'm not sure how many different kinds they create. This one is called a silver certificate. You can redeem this for $1 worth of silver. After all, you know, silver dollars are pretty heavy. They wear holes in your pocket. You don't want to carry all those silver coins. Let's give you a piece of paper. We'll hold your silver for you. Love of money, root of all evil, the Bible says. Keep that thought in mind. So, now the money doesn't say redeemable for anything. It simply says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Well, what on earth is legal tender? It always reminds me of tinder, something you start a fire with, you know. Legal tender. What on earth is legal tender? What's happened to our money? Well, we don't have any more. Many people are duped into thinking that they're obligated to go along with what's happening without protest. It is such a complicated web that they have woven to trap us in. By taking away the gold and silver, we no longer have the ability to buy anything with real money. Suppose you had a truckload of Confederate money from the Civil War. What could you do with it?
Wallpaper your wall.
Wallpaper your wall. That's about it, right? Someday, very soon, this will be wallpaper. You can't eat it. You can't wear it. You can't build a house out of it. Well, take a bunch of them, you could, I suppose. Absolutely useless piece of paper with some ink on it. Somebody once said the government of the United States is the only place I know where you can take a perfectly good commodity like paper, put some ink on it, and make it totally useless. Totally worthless. What good is that going to be? Well, again, we can go off on long rabbit trails there, but let me just give you the skinny version of what's going on. We, the people, created the government. Kent E. Hovind, John Doe, etc. These are real people. We create government. Now, government is an artificial, non-living, fictitious, called a person. Okay, but I'll use the word person in quotes here. Government is an artificial, non-living, fictitious person. And person in quotes here. We created government. People say, what is government anyway? Well, it's a consensus of what we the people want. The government owns, controls, regulates, taxes, assigns numbers to, fines, etc. Whatever it creates. See, if you create something, you own it. Let's continue now with more of our politically incorrect information from this class. Actually, it's politically correct. To everybody else, it's incorrect. Here's the basic principle. Whatever you create, you own it. You control it. It's the principle of ownership, okay? Since God created people, He owns us. We belong to Him. Our job is to find out what the boss wants and do it, okay? The people created government. So they're supposed to be public servants. How many of you have ever heard that expression before? Public servants, right? And they swear to uphold the Constitution and all that kind of stuff. Well, the government doesn't like the idea of being servant. They would like to be master. So they've got a really slick way that this is happening. And most of the folks even involved in government don't even know what's happened. A few do, okay? And enough do to know what's going on. But they decided to create artificial people. Turn to page 26 in this little booklet, which is Citizens Rule Book. These are $1 a piece from our ministry. This is the whole Constitution to the United States and the Declaration of Independence, and a very fascinating section on jury nullification. If you're ever called in to be on a jury, and let's suppose your city passes a law that it's against the law to spit on the sidewalk, okay? And you think that's a stupid law. You got a right to spit on the sidewalk if you want. And so some guy's hauled in, and it's obvious he's guilty. They got photographs of him, videotape. He spat on the sidewalk, okay? But you as a juror think the law is wrong. After the court case, you sit there, you listen to everybody, give all their arguments. It's obvious, yep, the guy spit on the sidewalk. No question, he broke the law. However, the law is no good. All you do as a juror is vote not guilty. Now, it's obvious he's guilty of breaking the law, but the law is not constitutional or not good. So you simply vote not guilty. Your not guilty vote can nullify a bad law. Very few jurors know this, but this is fascinating reading, the section on jury nullification. You might want to read that in case you ever get on a jury. Page 26. Let's see, Jan, English teacher for how long? How long have you been teaching English, Jan?
What, 86?
A while, right? Okay. Would you look at the title on page 26? This is the Declaration of Independence, okay? The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Now, as an English teacher, what do you see with that? 13.
More states than that.
Or is now more now, but notice the word united is not capitalized. You see that? States is capitalized. See, states are sovereign. The fact that they united is just an adjective describing what they did. Okay? Or, yeah. The united is not capitalized. This is a critical issue here now. The real United States is with a small u, capital S. Here's how we got tricked in the last 70 years, okay? God created people. People created governments based on God's laws. America was founded on the laws that came from God, okay? These states then, the 13 states, got together and created a government called the United States of America. And they gave that government authority over a small section called Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, 10 miles by 10 miles in Maryland, Virginia. The Virginia side, during the Civil War, went with the South. So we lost half of the ground that the capital was supposed to be on. And I think it was Robert E. Lee's home was right there. And so during the war, they took thousands and thousands of Yankee soldiers that were killed and buried them in Robert E. Lee's front yard. Turned it into a graveyard. The cemetery is still there today. What's the name of it? Arlington Cemetery. Robert E. Lee's front yard. Just so he wouldn't want to live there anymore. You know, thousands of Yankee soldiers in his front yard. Long story behind that too. Anyway, the United States of America is supposed to be the servant to the states. They have no jurisdiction in the states without the state's permission. Now, the average county sheriff doesn't understand this. Some do, okay? But the federal government is not allowed to do anything without the county sheriff's permission. The sheriff of the county is boss, okay? And in Wyoming, there's numerous counties where they have told the federal government, do not come into our county. This happens all over the United States. There are sheriffs who say, you federal government, IRS agents, don't come in our county. You come to us first. You don't seize anybody's property. You don't take away anybody's car. You don't do nothing without our permission. That's why they always get the county sheriff involved, okay? The county sheriff can say, no, I don't want any federal agents at all in my jurisdiction. Stay out. He could keep the FBI out. The county sheriff could.
It's funny because you see all these movies where...
Yeah, I'm FBI, I'm taking over here. Yeah, oh boy, I know. We've all been conditioned up here. Okay. Now I have a red line on my drawing on purpose here because this is a mirror. We're going to go through a mirror now because the United States went bankrupt in the early 30s. The bankers who control the money, love of money, root of all evil, said, look, fellas, you're bankrupt. We're calling in the note. We are taking over, and we don't want the people to panic. Everybody's worried now because of the Depression, you know, times are pretty hard, so they're kind of busy thinking of other things. So they probably won't notice what's going on anyway. We're going to create a new corporation, and we're going to name it United States. But now it's all capital letters. And everybody thinks they're still in the same place. No. You now live in a corporate United States, which is run, owned, controlled, regulated by these super rich people, which is exactly what they've wanted all along. The United States then created 50 state corporations. Big difference here. There are two Floridas, state of Florida and Florida State. One is the real estate of Florida. The other, which happens to have the same boundaries, is the corporate Florida State. Same geographic boundaries, okay? People have argued that in many, many states, the boundaries of the corporate state was never defined. And so there's a whole argument there. You can chase that rabbit a long ways down the trail if you'd like. But FL, capital F, capital L, is the abbreviation for the corporate Florida. FLA is the abbreviation for the real Florida. It can be whichever one you'd like, okay? These rich folks also, as part of the master plan, created a person for each of the people. See, God created people, so He owns them. The government created persons, so they own them. The person they create is called a straw man. Has no brain. It's just a piece of paper that says this represents Kent Hovind. But the name is in all capital letters. Now that person was created via the birth certificate. When your parents got a birth certificate for you, the hospitals will just about go nuts if you try to leave without getting a birth certificate, because they're really under pressure to get those birth certificates, because the birth certificate creates an artificial person. When that artificial person is created, the birth certificate then becomes worth some money. It can be bartered and sold and traded like commodities or cows or sheep or corn on the international market. And the president can say, man, we've got, X number of million new people in the United States that were born this year. We can borrow more money now against their birth certificates. They are the collateral. We are, the straw man becomes the collateral for the national debt. So the bankers say, yes, we will loan you more money, but we want these birth certificates because we want to own and control these persons, and we will then collect taxes off of them. The average person is probably going to pay a certain amount of money per lifetime, and so they do an average. What's this birth certificate worth? This person is probably worth, so many $100,000 to us. And so they will loan money based on how many birth certificates they can get. A birth certificate is unnecessary to obtain, and you should not get one for your children when they're born. You can register the birth. You can notify them this child was born, but you don't need to get a birth certificate. Okay, so let's follow the yellow brick road here. God creates people. People create state government. State governments created the United States of America. Small u, capital S. Big difference here. The United States was created, which is the corporate United States. And very few people realize there's a vast difference between the two, okay? They created states. The states created persons. Up above the line, which represents a mirror. How many remember Through the Looking Glass? Or Dorothy? Not Dorothy. Who was the one? Alice in Wonderland. Went through the looking glass. There's all symbolic stuff here, okay? Above the line is Kansas. This is the real world. Below the line is Oz. Remember when Dorothy got out of the house, she said, we're not in Kansas anymore. Well, and after about 1935 or 36 in America, we're not in Kansas anymore, folks. Now we're in Oz. Now, in Oz, Dorothy met several interesting people. First place, she had, in the book, she had silver slippers. In the movie, she had ruby slippers, okay? She followed the yellow brick road, representing gold. Just the name of the city, Oz, is gold. Ounces, O-Z, okay? They spelled it out for us, gold. In this, there were some people she dealt with. There was a straw man, no brain. That represents the artificial person created by you, by the government for you, with your name on it, but the name's in all capital letters. Very important. Another fellow in there is called the Tin Man. The Tin Man in the movie represents commerce. He wants one thing. Remember, the first words out of his mouth were what? Oil. He's standing there rusting. I need oil, oil, you know. What doesn't he have?
A heart.
Tin Man doesn't have a heart. And commerce is ruthless. This is the way it is. You don't make it, tough. Okay? Heartless. The lion, apparently, a cowardly lion, represents England, that knew what was going on and didn't have the courage to do anything about it. I've got a great article in my file of billions of articles I have called The City, showing how that in England there's a financial district called The City in London. The Queen herself is not allowed to go in there without permission. This is the people that own the city, is the bankers, and they really run the world from the city. Nobody goes in there. I've heard that even the Queen, when she goes in, has to go in dressed as a pauper because she has to borrow money from these bankers. Love of money, root of all evil. Okay. When they get to Oz, they find out they go in and there's this huge wizard. You know, he's got this big old face and the flames and the smoke and the noise and all this stuff. At the end of the movie, they find out it's a little old man behind the curtain pulling some levers. Everybody's scared stiff of the Wizard of Oz. They find out it's all phony. There's so many illustrations you could make here. Satan does the same thing to the world. Everybody thinks, wow, look how powerful and how big Satan is. Well, he's a puny little man behind the curtain pulling some levers. And in the book of Ezekiel, it says, in Isaiah or Ezekiel, people are going to say at the end, is this the man that made the nations to tremble? This is Satan? Oh, come on. You got to be kidding.
28.
Is Ezekiel 28?
Ezekiel 28.
Ezekiel 28, yeah. Is this the man that made the nations to tremble? They're going to look narrowly upon him and say, you got to be kidding. This is him. It's a little old man behind the curtain. Okay. So the straw man is called your corporate soul. Since the government created a corporate soul, they own it. Now, you have tied yourself to that straw man numerous ways. You've been using his Social Security number. You've been using his birth certificate to get things done. You've been using his driver's license. See, the straw man is owned by the government, so he's supposed to do all those things. They said, we want Kent Hovind, the straw man, to get a driver's license, to get a birth certificate, to get a marriage license, to get, blah, 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 blah. Well, this leaves you with 4 choices. Since they created a business in your name, you can, number 1, do what they say, which moves you from right under God down to way at the bottom under the government. You are now a slave, because that's where the straw man is. Okay, he's way at the bottom of the totem pole. You can do what they say, which is what 90%, 95% of the people do. They don't know any better. They don't realize they're tied to this straw man because they've been using his name. Number 2, you can cut the string and say, that's not me. I'm not that person that you say. Many people do that very successfully. You got to be careful, though, because they don't like the sheep getting out of the pasture because they intend to shear them once in a while. And so they're pretty bad about this. I'll show you that in a minute, what one guy did in Canada. Choice number 3, you can look for loopholes between the government and their straw man, and there are tons of loopholes. That's kind of what Irwin Schiff does in his take on looking for loopholes, and there's lots of them, legitimate loopholes, okay? Choice number 4 is just redeem that straw man. Send a notice to the government saying, look, you've been doing business in my name. I'm laying claim to that account, that straw man account. I'm redeeming it. I'm claiming it for me. And then you give them notice. If I don't hear from you within 20 days with a good reason of why I shouldn't do this, I'm going to assume you have no reason, and by their silence they admit. Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, rule number 4, I believe it is. If you make a statement to the government and they don't rebut it, it stands as true. So you claim, that's mine. Where's your rebuttal? They don't respond. It's now yours. And that's called redeeming the straw man, which I have done, and anybody can do. We end up signing contracts that make us slaves of the government. Who gives the authority to get married? Where does the right to marry come from?
God.
God. Why do we ask the state's permission then to do that? Suppose I decided, suppose I could trick all of you into getting my permission to drive on the highway. If you came and you said, Brother Hovind, can I drive on the highway? I'd say, well, yeah, I want to make sure you're safe, so I want you to take a little test first. I want to see if you can drive well. And then if you'll give me $50, I'll issue you a driver's license so that you can drive on the highway. And you go through the rest of your life thinking, wow, Brother Hovind gave me permission. See, I got permission right here to drive on the highway. You don't need my permission to drive on the highway. You can drive one anyway. But if you're dumb enough to give me 50 bucks, I'll take it. And if you want to put yourself under my authority, well, come on under. Everybody's welcome, okay? But you'd be a fool to do that. Since God gives the right to get married, if you go to the state and ask for their permission to get married, to get a marriage license, do you have your marriage covenant? Yeah, grab that for me, would you please? If you get a marriage license, you have now asked the state for permission to do something that God already told you you can do. And you have now put yourself down with that straw man. Interesting thing happens. Once you get attached to this straw man, you become under all those rules and regulations and you carry the burden of everything above you. You don't have to get a marriage license. If you do get a marriage license, that is a contract between you and the wife or husband and the state. The fine print of the contract gives them permission to take your kids away if they don't like the way you're raising them. One friend of mine had a girl in his church. She was 12 years old, I believe, and mom spanked her one night for doing something, you know. And she got all huffy and got mad at mom, you know. Next day she goes to school, she's still mad at mom. And one of her friends says, hey, you want to get your mom in trouble? Call the welfare department. That'll fix them. Claim you were abused, child abuse. Well, the idiot 12-year-old did. Called welfare department, you know, claimed child abuse. They came out and really hassled that family. And once you get the welfare department on your case, you can't hardly get them off, okay? The girl felt sorry for what's happening. She wrote a letter, said, look, I'm sorry, I lied, it wasn't true, you know, I'm sorry. Didn't matter. Welfare's on your case, boy, you're done. They want to come inspect your house every week, and et cetera, you know. So they asked the pastor, they said, Pastor, what do we do? And he said, well, do you have a marriage license? They said, well, yeah. He said, there's your problem right there. That license gives them the authority to come in your house and take away your kids if they don't like the way you're raising them. They said, well, how do we get out of this? He said, well, you signed a contract. Now, you probably didn't know that the contract was by fraud, and so you can redeem this, you can get out of this mess by simply filling out a little paper, just write out a little sentence that says, I hereby revoke, renege, rescind, annul, disallow, all these legal terms, my signature on my marriage license. Go down to the courthouse and have it file stamped, it costs you $5 or $6, and it'll go into your file as you have, at this date, annulled, disallowed your signature on your marriage license. Now, that doesn't mean you're not married anymore, but it means they no longer now have authority. So when this family did that, welfare department left them alone. Have no authority anymore. If a Mexican police officer showed up at my door, said, Mr. Hovind, we've got a law in Mexico that says you can't do whatever, and we saw you driving across Pensacola and you broke one of our laws. Yeah? What's your point, sir? Well, come with me, you're under arrest. No, sir, I'm sorry. You have no authority here. You're a Mexican police officer. Your authority stops at the border. You have no authority here. That was the big deal during moonshine days. They would run for the county line to get away from the revenuers because he only had authority in a certain area. It all goes back to who has authority, who's in charge anyway. So a driver's license, a marriage license, a Social Security card are three of the primary contracts we have made. Now, if you want to get out of those contracts, simple to do. Okay, Pastor Mooneyhan, who was the pastor of the church that our ministry is under, has called a freedom package. Yeah, that's his phone number right there. It's like $50 for the freedom package. If you want to get it, it's 352-498-0384. And he can give you this freedom package of what forms to fill out and get you out of all these contracts you've gotten yourself into that you did not realize you got yourself into. So that might be something you would want to consider. And he can help you with all the details. I don't have time to mess with it. All right? I'm not afraid of the subject. I just don't have time to mess with it. Okay. Bruce, a friend of mine up in Canada, this is a letter he wrote. It's on my website. Jeff, at the last couple pages of that article you have there, that's the article off my website, but is this letter, okay? Bruce in Canada decided, you know, God gave me the authority to drive. Why do I need the Canadian government's permission? And he got to studying this straw man issue and said, look, they created a straw man and they regulate him, but they don't regulate me. I'm a natural-born citizen. Here's a letter that he wrote. I've got them all on my website. It's fascinating. He says, hi, folks. I went to court this morning, driven by a good friend, Don Scully. I really didn't know what to expect and had determined not to argue for my rights. But if need be, to simply state from Scripture why I could not any longer accept and acknowledge a fictitious driver's license in the name of a fictitious legal person. The straw man. Number 2, be surety for the debts of others, contrary to Proverbs, by having auto insurance policy. Because you are now surety for somebody else's debts. That's the way he felt about it. Number 3, anyway, bottom line is he gave up his driver's license, his license plates, and his insurance. Sent them to the government. Said, I'm sorry, I got these by fraud. I didn't realize this is for an artificial person. It's not for me. Sure enough, he got stopped. Given tickets, no driver's license, no license plates, etc. Here's the letter. Let's go on here. To be honest with you, I went to court with very little faith and anticipated that the judge would not listen to what I had to say and would probably levy the fines. The minimum fine for the insurance charge was $5,000. So I expected I'd probably have to go to jail, as I simply don't have money like that. When my name was called, I stood outside the gate, refused to enter into the jurisdiction of the court, and asked the judge, and stated to the judge that I was the natural person, Williford Bruce Woodford. Let me back up here and show you this. He stayed outside the gate. Go to any courtroom and you'll see they've got the judge and the jury and the 2 tables for the lawyers and a little gate, a little rail. Why do they have that little railing in there? That represents the edge of a ship. When you cross over that railing, you have entered the judge's martial military law, maritime law. So if you don't go inside that gate, they have no jurisdiction over you. So he stayed outside the gate, very wise. He stood up. He said, Judge, I'm a natural person, Bruce Woodford, or Wilford Bruce Woodford. And that it was my understanding that all the 3 defendants in the case before him, failure to surrender a driver's license, driving without a valid permit, and driving without insurance, were legal persons with which I have nothing to do. At that point, the judge motioned with his finger for me to step forward so I can hear you better. Yeah, right. He wants to get him inside that gate. Okay? I simply ignored him and reiterated that I was a natural person to whom the offense notices had been delivered, but that I was not the legal persons named as defendants. That being the case, I asked the judge if there was any further need of my presence in the courtroom. He said, wait a minute, let me consider what has been said. He was silent for some time and fingered through the papers before him. Then he spoke about this legal person I had referred to. He read the 3 charges and asked me if I was not the one who was alleged to have committed these offenses. Again, I replied that I was a natural person and that the Dictionary of Canadian Law clearly distinguishes between natural persons and legal persons. At that point, he said, if you are sure you are not the person to whom named in these charges, you are free to leave. But, he continued, I have 2 options before me. If you are the person named, your driver's license will be suspended. To which I responded, sir, I have no driver's license. Number 2, I can order the police officer who laid these charges to arrest the person against whom these charges were laid. If you are not that person, you have nothing to fear. You are free to go. And so I left. Since then, they've had him back into court twice, and he laughs about it now because he goes in there and he knows they have nothing they can do to him. He just shows up just to see what's going to happen. All of his letters back and forth between the judges are on my website and at the end of that article, if you want to get that. Okay, that's Bruce Woodford. Anyway, he has taken the approach of, look, that ain't me. That's a straw man. That doesn't apply to me. Okay. If the term United States is written out with both capital letters, that is referring to the federal entity defined by Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. This is Washington, D.C. So, if somebody says, are you a citizen of the United States? And you sign yes under penalty of perjury, you're claiming you live in Washington, D.C. Now, Washington, D.C. is not one of the 50 states. They are under a very different set of rules and regulations. They could pass any rules they wanted in Washington, D.C. So if you're claiming you live in Washington, D.C. under penalty of perjury, well, then they're going to assume the law applies to you. If a Mexican police officer showed up at my door and said, Mr. Hovind, are you a Mexican citizen? Or he put a paper in front of me and says, sign this to swear you're a Mexican citizen and you will abide by the Mexican laws. Well, if I'm dumb enough to sign that paper, yes, under penalty of perjury, okay, I just put myself under Mexican law. And if you sign a paper under penalty of perjury that, yes, I'm a citizen of capital U, capital S, you just put yourself in Washington, D.C. I don't live in Washington, D.C. I don't even like to go to the place, okay? I sure don't want to live there. And I definitely don't want to be a citizen of it. Okay? If it is a small u, capital S. Now that's one of the 50 states. I fly all over the world. I've been to 26 countries doing my seminars on creation and more coming. Invariably, I get on the airplane, I'm flying over to the country, and they say, you got to fill out this paper to get in, you know. And invariably on that paper it says, are you a citizen of the United States? And it's capital U, capital S. So I simply take out my pen, cross out the capital U, write in the small u, and I add the words of America. Small u, United States of America. And sign it, yes, I'm a citizen of that, sure. The average guy looking at these forms, he doesn't catch what I did, I'm sure. But I don't want to claim to be a citizen of Washington, D.C. For one thing, I'm not. And if I did, I'd be under all sorts of rules that I don't want to be under. I got enough rules to obey, okay? I got enough rules right here to obey that I'm not doing all of those. I sure don't want to be under their laws. So United States citizens are actually citizens of the District of Columbia, if it's capital U, capital S. Now, if it's all capital letters, this is referring to the Philippines. See, they've tricked us by using certain words. Suppose I wrote out a document, and I said, at the very beginning, I said, in this document, the word up means down. I could do that, couldn't I? Then I can write a big, long story, and every time I say the word up, it really means down, right? At the beginning of the IRS code, it says, United States means District of Columbia. And then all the rest of this stuff is for them. It's not for me. Unless I claim to live there. Oh, now it applies to me. So they're going to trap you. Somehow, they're going to try to trap you into being part of Washington, D.C., because that's what this applies to. If you want to live in Washington, D.C., or be subject to their laws, enjoy yourself. I don't want to be subject to those laws. If it's just United States, that's talking about the District of Columbia. It can be written several different ways. Capital U, capital S, or all capital letters means the same thing. It's District of Columbia. So the rich men, and the Bible talks a lot about woe go to ye rich men, weep and howl for the miseries that shall come upon you. You know, the love of money, root of all evil. The Bible talks a lot about that. Okay? They trick people into getting a Social Security number in order to get benefits from the government. They created a crisis. This is the technique they've used for centuries. Create a crisis so that you can accomplish some particular goal. Remember, Nero wanted to get rid of the Christians. So, set the city on fire. Burned Rome down and blamed it on the Christians. Hitler wanted gun control. Yeah. Hitler wanted gun control, so he blew up the Reichstag, the federal building of the German government. Blew it up. Said, wow, look, terrorist attack. We need more gun control. The militias were growing like crazy in America after what happened at Waco. And they had gun control legislation that was stalled in Congress. People were scared of their government, and rightfully so. And they're trying to get more gun control regulation passed. And so the federal government blew up Oklahoma City Mirror Building to blame it on the militia. If you watch my video number 5, we've got a whole bunch of footage on there from the news footage. Right after, have you seen that, haven't you, Eric? Right after the bombing, for the next few hours, the cameramen are swarming all over the place, and they say, we can't go in the building yet. They just brought out bomb number 3. Oh, folks, they just discovered another bomb, unexploded. That news footage, I've got it all, okay? Telling about the bombs they were bringing out of the building that had not exploded. Now, who got blamed for that? Timothy McVeigh with a truck bomb in the street. First place, anybody knows anything about explosives will tell you there's no way a truck bomb is going to shear the pillars off. You might blow the walls out, blow the walls out or break all the windows. But you don't cut the pillars off. The people who blow up buildings for a living, have a hard time. They've got to very carefully engineer. Put the explosive right on the pillar. They drill a bunch of holes in the pillar, put the explosives in just the right place, to cut that thing off. After the building was blown up, it wasn't very long. The rest of the building was demolished. You don't ever destroy evidence at a crime scene. All of this rubble is hauled off to a dump, and an armed guard is posted on the dump. Well, why do you need a guard at dump, sir? They're afraid somebody might dig up that garbage and find out the pillars were sheared off by C4 plastic explosives, and that the federal government actually blew up that building for numerous reasons. It sure did get the gun control through Congress. I mean, it passed right away. All you need is a crisis to make an excuse to do some illegal activity. So the Depression was created intentionally, create the crisis, so that people will accept what you're trying to give them, a number. That's what happened. Here's a Social Security card that my wife got when she was a child. I've changed the numbers on here, okay? Notice what it says at the bottom. For Social Security and tax purposes, not for identification. Interesting. Did you know you were not allowed to use your Social Security card for identification purposes? Well, what do they always ask for now for identification purposes? Social Security number. It said not for identification. Here's the new card. Oh no, it doesn't say that anymore. The new card does not say that. But on the back of this new card, there's a number. Again, I changed the numbers on here, okay? The C123456666, this is the bank account number in Washington, D.C., where the straw man's money is kept. That's the account number. If you have a card that's been issued since 1992, it'll look like this, dark blue. Look on the back, there's your bank account number that they deal through. There's a regular account with your straw man name on it. And they're doing business in your name through this straw man account. And there's the number. What some people have done, with varying degrees of success, and I don't understand all about this, but Ernie Land does, and John D'Arcy does, and their names are listed in that article right there. They sent in a notice and said, look, that straw man belongs to me. I claim it. The government doesn't respond, and so for the rest of their life, if they ever get a bill from the government, they pay it through their straw man account. Suppose the government gives you a ticket for speeding. Well, the Constitution says, you know, your property cannot be taken away without due process, and there has to be an injured party. Well, who did you injure by speeding? Nobody. Now, if you do injure somebody by speeding, you should pay for it according to Scripture. Okay? If you hurt somebody, you make it good. So you might want to think about that. But the fact is, you didn't injure anybody. So you get stopped, they give you a ticket, $50. And you're such a nice guy. You say, listen, you know, Bible says if someone compels you to go a mile, go 2. If he asks for your coat, give him your cloak also. You asked for $50. You take the ticket, you write right across the face. We've got a stamp that we use for this, you know, or no, an overlay we put and we copy to the copy machine. It says, accepted for value. And I write in the amount, okay? I accept this $50, this $50 ticket you just gave me, and I'm going to give you $300 out of my straw man account. So I send a letter along with this copy of this ticket and accepted for value. You know, I send all this to Robert Rubin, Secretary of the Treasury, Washington, D.C., and says, you know, I want you to pay the county $300 out of my straw man account. Well, Robert Rubin now has a problem because their books won't balance. The ticket's only for $50. I'm wanting to give him $300. What about this extra $250? How does he balance the books? Well, he takes it out of the local sheriff's operating fund to balance the books.
You owe us $250 now.
So it cost them $250 to give me that ticket. IRS sends you a bill, $1,000. You owe us $1,000. Oh, listen, I don't want to fight anybody. Look, you want my cloak? Here, I'll give you my coat. I'll give you everything. I'll give you $5,000 out of this straw man account, which has, it starts off with $1.6 million when you're born. That's what they put in it, okay, to do business out of this account. And I don't know a lot more about it than that, okay? So you'd want to get with John D'Arcy or with Ernie Land on my website to get more information on that. But that's the account number, and it works. Tennessee, Governor of Tennessee, I believe, or someone, sent letters to a bunch of the police officers, said, would you please stop giving tickets to these patriots because we can't afford this. It's costing us a fortune to give out these tickets.
What about the account number for the older cards?
I don't know. I don't know where that is or was.
You can get a new card, though.
Yeah, walk in and get a new card. Anybody can. They'll give it to you. Okay? New ones don't say that, okay? The account number for your debt account is on the back. People say, you have to have a Social Security number. No, you don't. I do everything without a Social Security number. Go to the post office, pick up this form to get drafted. Selective service, you know? Look what it says in yellow. Block 3. If you have a Social Security account number, it is mandatory that you include this information. If you don't have one, leave this block blank. Well, what does that tell me? I don't have to have one? Wouldn't you assume that's what it's saying? Certainly.
Do you have to sign up for selective service?
I don't know if you have to sign up for selective service or not. You can if you want to. But that's a good question. Probably Ernie would know that, or John DRC would know that. You know, those guys are up on all. That's a little out of my field of expertise, but I like studying about it. It's fascinating, you know. But they're much more knowledgeable on the topic than I am. Taco Bell was sued because they refused to hire a kid because he would not divulge his Social Security number. He said, that's private information. It's none of your business what my Social Security number is. According to the law, you are only required to give your Social Security number if you are applying for Social Security benefits. Nobody else is allowed to demand that from you. Now, if a bank won't open a bank account, the Amish don't even have Social Security numbers. They have bank accounts. They do everything just like we do. They just simply say it's against my religious convictions. Oh, okay. Open the account. You can sue a bank for discriminating against you if they refuse to open it. It has to be a non-interest bearing checking account, okay? Because the banks are tied in with the Federal Reserve. All works together. If you want to put your money in their bank and earn interest on it, well, then you better play by their game. But as long as you're not earning interest, you just want them to hold your money for you because you don't want to keep it under the mattress. You're afraid somebody might break into the house, okay? Or for convenience, you're willing to pay them 10 cents a piece or 20 cents a piece every time you write a check. It's much more convenient to write checks than to carry cash around. Perfectly fine. But if they demand a number of you before they do that, you can sue them. Now, most people don't know this, and most people don't want to go through the hassle, and so they just go get a number. But it is totally voluntary. If you want to get out of a Social Security card, get out of a Social Security contract, check my website. It's now question number 40, but the number changes all the time. FAQ on my website. That's that paper you have there in front of you. It tells a little bit about Social Security. So the Federal Reserve, if you want to know more about the Federal Reserve and what happened, this is an excellent book to read. Bill Still. Do we have this book in our... It's $15 or something. There's his phone number. I believe he's in Oklahoma. If you really want to get a clear picture of what the Federal Reserve is, it's not federal, any more than Federal Express is federal. Okay, it's a private bunch of bankers that control our currency, and our Congress and Senate and President is scared stiff of the Federal Reserve. They run the show. Okay? This is
We have to be scared of the Federal Reserve.
We have to be careful because you're dealing with a beast, the Federal Reserve. I don't think you need to be scared. If you have redeemed the straw man,
You have nothing to worry about.
well, yeah, that really helps because now you have laid claim. Remember the movie The Matrix?
Yeah.
You know, you want the red pill or the blue pill. Some people are better off just taking the blue pill and go back to bed. If you want the red pill and you really want to understand what's going on, you probably, you know, I'll show you The Matrix. You might want to study some of these books to comprehend what's going on, because we have been trapped, okay? Just absolutely duped. You can't even pay bills anymore. You can't discharge a debt because you're giving them Federal Reserve notes. You're not paying cash for it. You're paying a note. So no debts have been paid unless you bought it with silver or gold since 1935 or 6, whenever they did that. Khrushchev used to brag that he got all of his secrets from Rockefeller. Rockefeller started the CIA, which is from Russia you got the KGB, same thing, right? CIA is the American KGB. Rockefeller started that. They took our gold, gave us paper. Next they're going to take away the paper, give us plastic, and then they'll take away the plastic and give us a mark in the hand. This spring at Pensacola, money will not be accepted. You want to go get a Coke, hamburger? Doesn't matter. You have to have a debit card. PCC's done that for a couple of years now, haven't they? It works great. It's a good system in many ways, but this is all forerunner to the mark of the beast type stuff. You want to get information on the mark of the beast, the little microchip and all that stuff? Carl Sanders is one of the guys who invented it. He built it. He travels all over and speaks on the topic. He's been here. We videotaped quite a bit of information with Carl Sanders. Great godly man. There's his email is shofar, SHO-PHAR, at trumpetmin.org. Trumpet Ministries is what he calls his organization, up in Leslie, Arkansas. Dean Martin here in Pensacola, good friend of ours, has lots of information on that. Terry Cook wrote this book here, The Mark of the New World Order. Gary Fry in North Carolina is a good friend of mine, has lots of information on this Mark of the Beast microchip type stuff if you want to get more on that. Okay, next week we'll finish up talking about money, Mondex Corporation, how it all ties in, and then try to finish with the Communist Manifesto and go on to how this is all part of a bigger plan for Satan to have a one world government, a new world order. Some people get upset with me because I even mention all this IRS type stuff in my seminar. They say, you should talk just about creation. Well, it all ties together. If God's the creator, then He's the boss. Now, if you want to give yourself to become a straw man underneath, and you don't want to be under God, well, you do whatever you want. Okay? But I want to be a sovereign citizen under God. I'm not lawless. I think everybody should obey the law. I'm trying real hard to understand it and obey it. And if they tell me United States means Washington, D.C., and then they go on for 4,000 pages talking about what you're supposed to do, I don't care. It's not me. Now, if you want to be there, well, fine, enjoy yourself, Good luck understanding it. That thing ought to be void for vagueness, A lot of people have declared that. Anyway, we'll cover more on that next week. Thank you.